Section 1. The town that time forgot. Close your eyes if you want. You do not need to follow along. You do not need to focus. This is a story you can let wash over you, slowly, like something settling at the bottom of a still lake. The words will be here when you drift in and out. The ideas will come and go like weather. You can rest. And the story we are telling tonight begins, as so many strange things do, with a place that should not exist. The town is called Springfield. You know it already, in the way you know a song you heard so many times as a child that you cannot remember when you first heard it. It lives in a particular fold of your memory, soft and familiar, like a house you grew up in, yellow sky, yellow people, a power plant on one horizon and a mountain range on another, a main street with a donut shop and a bar and a nuclear facility all within walking distance of each other, a family on a couch, the same couch, every week. For 36 years, Springfield is the most famous town in American television history. More people could draw you a rough map of it than could name the capital of most states in the actual country. We know its streets, we know its characters, we know its rhythms and its jokes and the sound of Homer's voice before he even opens his mouth. And yet, when you ask the simplest question about Springfield, the one question that should have the simplest answer, everything starts to come apart. Where is it? Not in a philosophical sense. Literally, geographically. On a map of the United States, where does Springfield sit? The show has been running since December of 1989, 36 seasons, nearly 800 episodes. In all of that time, across every single story that has ever been told in this town, the show has never given a definitive answer. And the remarkable thing is not just that the answer is missing. The remarkable thing is how carefully, how deliberately, how almost architecturally the show has constructed its own geographic ambiguity. Springfield has oceanfront property. It also sits in the heartland of America, surrounded by farmland. It is near the Canadian border. It is also near Mexico. It has mountains visible from the town center, and those mountains are snow-capped in winter. It also has desert nearby, the kind of flat red rock desert you find in the American Southwest. There is a harbor. There is a gorge. There is a tire fire that has been burning for years. There are active volcanoes within driving distance. No single location in the United States has all of these things. You cannot find a place on a real map where ocean and mountain and desert and farmland all converge within an hour of each other. The geography of Springfield violates the geography of the actual country it is supposedly set in. The show borders itself against 4 different states across its run. Ohio is implied in some episodes, Nevada in others. Maine appears in some clues. Kentucky comes up elsewhere. The state abbreviation has been shown on screen as NT, which is not a real state at all. When Homer once called the state capital, the voice on the other end described a state beginning with a vowel, which narrows it to perhaps 6 or 7 possibilities and still leaves us with nothing certain. Matt Groening, the man who created the show, finally answered the question directly in 2012. He gave an interview to Smithsonian Magazine, and he said it. Springfield is named after Springfield, Oregon. He grew up near it. He liked the name because it sounded like every American town at once, like a place name so common it could belong anywhere. For roughly 48 hours, the mystery was solved. Springfield, Oregon. Case closed. And then the show continued, and the next batch of episodes placed Springfield in geographic contexts that were completely inconsistent with Oregon. The writers did not honor Groening's answer. The continuity did not reflect it. The mystery simply resumed, politely ignoring the confession that had been made on its behalf, like a river that reroutes itself around an obstacle and keeps flowing. Why would they do that? The easiest answer is the one the creators themselves have given. Springfield is meant to be everywhere. It is meant to be your town, whoever you are, wherever you grew up. If it were specifically set in Oregon, viewers in Florida would feel slightly less ownership of it. If it were set in the Midwest, viewers on the coast would hold it at arm's length. The vagueness is the point. Springfield is universal because Springfield belongs to everyone who has ever lived in a mid-sized American town with a nuclear plant they try not to think about and a billionaire in a mansion they drive past on the way to work. That is the surface explanation, and it is true as far as it goes. But there is a version of this answer that sits underneath the obvious one, and it is considerably stranger. Think about what Springfield's geographic ambiguity actually does. Practically speaking, within the world of the show, a town with no fixed location has no fixed regulatory authority. There is no permanent state attorney general looking into the nuclear facility. There is no consistent EPA office with jurisdiction. The safety violations at the power plant, the radioactive waste in the waterways, the three-eyed fish in the rivers, all of it exists in a kind of legal twilight zone. You cannot prosecute a company for contaminating a state's environment if the state keeps changing. You cannot serve a warrant if no one can confirm the address. Springfield floats between jurisdictions the way a ship might float between territorial waters. It is always just barely outside wherever accountability would find it. The town itself, in its physical construction, is also architecturally impossible in ways that go beyond just geography. Springfield has a vibrant downtown and a crumbling industrial district, and a pristine suburb, and a waterfront and a mountainside neighborhood, all seemingly within walking distance of each other. American cities do not work that way. Real urban geography involves distance and traffic, and the kind of spatial reality that means you cannot walk from a harbor to a ski slope in 20 minutes. Springfield compresses all of these things into a single coherent space where everything is somehow adjacent to everything else. And the town has survived things that should have destroyed it. The town has been sealed under a glass dome by the federal government. It has been invaded. It has been destroyed and rebuilt. A monorail built on fraudulent grounds fell apart on its opening day. A sinkhole swallowed an entire neighborhood. A hurricane flattened one side of town. An alien invasion, depending on how seriously you take certain Halloween episodes, may have happened at some point. After each of these catastrophes, Springfield resets. The dome comes down, or the rubble is cleared, or the monorail is quietly forgotten, and the town is exactly as it was before. The skyline is intact, the streets are clean, the tire fire is still burning in the background, and the nuclear plant is still emitting its soft, impossible glow over the rooftops at dusk. You can watch this happen if you pay attention. An episode ends with something genuinely catastrophic. An episode begins, the next week, with the same establishing shot of the same main street and the same family on the same couch, and nothing has changed. No damage, no reconstruction, no lingering consequence of any kind. The show treats this as a television convention, and in technical terms, it is. Episodic animated storytelling does not carry consequences from week to week, because doing so would require the audience to keep careful track of accumulated damage to a town across decades of programming. It is a production choice, a practical decision. But watch it long enough and something else starts to emerge. The resets are so complete, so immediate, so thorough, that they begin to feel less like convenience and more like mechanism. Springfield does not just forget its disasters, it erases them. The town wakes up each week with no memory of what happened to it, and every inhabitant, every single person who lived through the dome or the hurricane or the monorail collapse also has no memory. They all share the same amnesia. They all emerge from the same fog. That is not how people work. That is not how communities work. People remember their disasters. Towns carry the marks of their catastrophes for generations. There are places in America where you can still see the waterline from a flood that happened before anyone living there was born. Communities carry their traumas in their architecture, in their stories, in the particular way they talk about the years when things went wrong. Springfield does none of that. Springfield is clean, Springfield is reset, and nobody in Springfield seems to find this remarkable. One more piece of the geography puzzle before we let the first section settle into quiet. There is a theory, not widely discussed but worth turning over slowly in the dark, that Springfield's geographic inconsistency is not a mistake or a convenience, or even a deliberate design choice in the way the creators describe it. The theory is that Springfield's geography reflects the geography of a dreaming mind. Dreams do not obey maps. When you dream of a place from your childhood, the house might be on a beach it was never near, the school might be next door to a mountain that did not exist in your actual town, the streets might lead somewhere geographically impossible but emotionally correct. Dreams compress space the way Springfield compresses space. They put the things that matter to you in proximity to each other, regardless of where they actually sit in the real world. If Springfield is being dreamed, if Springfield exists inside someone's unconscious mind, then its impossible geography is not a flaw in the logic. It is the logic. Dreams do not have state borders. Dreams do not have consistent weather patterns. Dreams have emotional architecture, not geographic architecture. The mountain is there because someone needed to see a mountain from their window. The ocean is there because someone needed to hear waves. The desert is there because some part of a sleeping mind remembered crossing one, once, on a drive they half forgot. We will come back to the dreaming theory in much more depth later in this story. For now, let that thought rest alongside the image of Springfield's skyline, with its cracked cooling towers and its impossibly close mountains, lit by a sun that has not moved in 36 years. Settle in, close your eyes a little more. Springfield is somewhere out there, on some map that does not quite line up with any map you have ever seen, and we are just beginning to understand what that means. Drop a comment with where you are watching from and what time it is. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe. It helps more than you know. Section 2. The Yellow Skin Problem. There is something that every person who has ever watched The Simpsons has accepted without thinking about it, in the way you accept the color of your walls or the sound your house makes at night. Something that lives so deep in the show's visual language that it stopped being visible years ago. Everyone in Springfield is yellow. Not slightly yellowish, not a warm peachy gold that you might attribute to a particular kind of light. Yellow. A bright, flat, unambiguous yellow that the show applies to every human being who lives in or around the town. Homer is yellow, Marge is yellow, Bart and Lisa and Maggie are yellow. Their neighbors are yellow. Their teachers are yellow. The mayor is yellow. The police are yellow. The doctors and the mechanics and the bartenders and the farmers, all yellow, every one of them. And when visitors come to Springfield, when guest characters arrive from outside the town, they look different. This is the detail that the show has been including for 36 years and that almost no one talks about, because once you see it, it sits with you. Outside characters, celebrities, people who are just passing through Springfield, they have more natural proportions. Their eyes are shaped more like actual human eyes. Their skin tones are more varied, more realistic, more consistent with the range of human complexion. They look, in a word, like people. The Springfield residents look like something else. The official explanation has always been that this is the art style. Matt Groening drew the Simpsons family in a particular way, with their overbites and their bulging eyes and their four-fingered hands, and that style propagated across the entire cast. When celebrities are drawn into the show, they are given slightly more realistic proportions because the joke requires the audience to recognize them, and realism in caricature is a form of recognition. The Springfield residents are abstractions. The visitors are approximations of real people. It is all just animation. That explanation is entirely reasonable and almost certainly correct in terms of actual production intent. But within the logic of the show's own universe, within the world where Springfield is a real place and these are real people, the difference between residents and visitors means something. Visually, observably, consistently across hundreds of episodes, the people who live inside Springfield look different from the people who do not. And the question that the show quietly implies without ever asking is, why? Let us start with the most obvious candidate. The Springfield nuclear power plant has been leaking since it opened. This is not speculation or fan theory. The show establishes it directly, repeatedly, across many seasons. Safety inspectors have found 342 individual violations in a single inspection. Radioactive waste has been dumped into rivers. It has been found on children's playgrounds. It has been used as a paperweight on someone's desk. The cooling towers have cracks that were patched with chewing gum, and not metaphorically. Someone found a piece of chewing gum to be an appropriate engineering solution. The town's water comes from sources that the plant's runoff feeds directly. The air near the plant carries whatever the cooling towers release. The ground between the facility and the residential neighborhoods of Springfield has been absorbing whatever leaks out of that building for as long as the building has been standing. Now, if you wanted to understand what prolonged, low-level radiation exposure does to a human population, you would not need to speculate. You would look at the evidence. You would look at what the show actually shows you. Season 2. A fish is pulled from a river near the power plant. The fish has 3 eyes, 3 visible, functional eyes, arranged across its face in a way that no fish in nature has ever been arranged. The fish becomes national news within the show. A gubernatorial candidate uses the fish as campaign evidence, arguing that Burns is poisoning the environment. Burns is forced to eat the fish on live television to demonstrate that it is harmless. The town watches and moves on. Nobody tests the water. Nobody conducts a follow-up study. Nobody asks the obvious follow-up question, which is, if the fish living in this water have grown an extra eye, what has the water been doing to the people drinking it? The show does not ask that question, but it has been answering it for 36 years, in the particular yellow of every face that appears in Springfield. Yellow skin. In medical contexts, yellowing of the skin is called jaundice. It is associated with liver dysfunction, with the accumulation of bilirubin in the bloodstream, with the body's inability to process and filter toxins the way it should. The liver is the organ responsible for filtering environmental contaminants from the blood. Extended exposure to heavy metals, to chemical pollutants, to the kind of low-level radioactive contamination that a leaking nuclear facility might produce can compromise liver function over time. The show does not say this. The show would never say this in any direct way, because saying it directly would transform the comedy into something else entirely. But the show drew everyone yellow, and the show gave us a three-eyed fish, and the show set the story in a town built around a nuclear facility with 342 safety violations. It arranged those pieces, it laid them out, and then it waited. Homer Simpson's physical form is worth examining here, because Homer is the character we know most thoroughly, the one the show has constructed in the most anatomical detail. He has 4 fingers on each hand, which is standard for animated characters and normally explained as an artistic shorthand. He has an overbite significant enough to qualify as a medical condition in any real oral health evaluation. His skull, if you look at it with any attention, has proportions that do not correspond to normal human cranial anatomy. His healing capacity is extraordinary to the point of being biological impossibility. He has been shot. He has been electrocuted. He has fallen from heights that would be fatal. He has survived explosions, car accidents, and at least one incident involving a boulder. Each time he recovers completely, sometimes within the same episode. This is cartoon logic, and the accepted explanation is that Homer's body simply obeys the rules of animation rather than the rules of biology. Things that would kill a person in the real world are funny in a cartoon, because the cartoon can reset the body to its previous state. But if you pull back and ask what biological mechanism would allow a human body to absorb that level of damage and recover, one answer presents itself with uncomfortable consistency. Radiation exposure at certain levels can fundamentally alter cellular biology. The cells of a person or creature living in a heavily contaminated environment might, over generations, adapt in ways that normal human biology would not. The adaptation might look like resilience. It might look like durability. It might look like a body that bends rather than breaks, that absorbs punishment and reconstitutes itself rather than shutting down the way an uncontaminated body would. Homer's near indestructibility, read through this lens, is not a cartoon convention. It is a symptom. The same thought applies to Marge. Her hair grows straight upward in a tower that she has maintained in the same shape for 36 years without any apparent structural support beyond whatever is happening at the follicular level. Hair does not do that. Keratin does not organize itself into a vertical column of that height without significant help from gravity-defying biology. And yet Marge's hair is as stable as architecture, as permanent as the nuclear plant's cooling towers on the horizon. Whatever is happening to the hair follicles of Springfield residents, it is not happening to people who live elsewhere. Lisa and Bart show their own variations. Bart's hair is a series of spikes that maintain their shape regardless of weather, wind, or activity. Lisa's hair is a set of triangular points that behave more like crystallized geometry than human hair. Maggie's single curl stays perfectly curved at all times. Hair, in the context of radiation biology, is worth noting. The hair follicle is one of the most radiation-sensitive tissues in the human body. Cells that divide rapidly, like follicle cells, are among the first to show the effects of radiation exposure. The hair of people who have been exposed to significant radiation sometimes grows back differently after the exposure ends, with different texture, different color, different structural properties. The hair of Springfield residents has structural properties that do not exist in human hair anywhere else on Earth. Now consider the eyes. Every Springfield resident has bulging eyes that protrude from the face in a way that suggests the tissue around the orbit has expanded, or the eyeball itself has grown slightly beyond its normal range. There are medical conditions in which the eyes protrude. Graves' disease, a thyroid condition, produces what doctors call exophthalmos, a protrusion of the eyeballs caused by inflammation and swelling of the tissue behind them. The thyroid gland is particularly sensitive to radiation exposure. Radiation-induced thyroid damage is one of the most well-documented consequences of nuclear fallout exposure in human populations. The show is not making a medical argument. The show did not sit down and design its characters to reflect the symptomatology of radiation-induced thyroid disease. The show designed its characters the way it designed them because that is how the creator drew them, and that is a perfectly complete explanation from a production standpoint. But within the world of Springfield, the eyes of its residents look the way they look. The thyroid glands of Springfield residents, if the water supply has been contaminated for long enough, would have been absorbing radioactive iodine for decades. The physical result of that kind of long-term thyroid disruption can include changes to the tissue around the eyes. The show drew the characters. The story explains the drawing. Burns is the most explicit data point in this argument. We will spend an entire section on Burns later, but the relevant piece here is the episode where Homer sees a glowing figure in the woods and believes he has encountered an alien. The investigation eventually reveals the truth. The figure is Burns, who has been undergoing weekly medical treatments so intensive, so saturated with chemicals and radiation therapy, that his body literally emits visible light after each session. Burns glows in the dark. His skin produces light. His tissue is so saturated with radioactive material that it becomes luminescent. The people of Springfield see this glowing figure in the forest, and their first instinct is not to think about the nuclear plant. Their first thought is extraterrestrial life. A glowing humanoid in the woods near a town with a nuclear plant draws a conclusion of space aliens rather than radiation contamination. The distance between what they see and what they conclude is a measure of something. Call it denial. Call it cognitive limitation. Call it the particular blindness of people who have been living inside a contaminated environment long enough that its effects have started to feel like normal. And now for the detail that makes the yellow skin argument genuinely difficult to dismiss. When people from outside Springfield come to visit, they do not turn yellow. They arrive with their natural coloring, whatever it is, and they leave with it intact. The contamination, if that is what it is, does not affect transient visitors. It affects long-term residents. The people who have been drinking the water for years, breathing the air for decades, absorbing whatever the cracked cooling towers release into the atmosphere on a daily basis, those people are yellow. The fish in the river are yellow in their own way, with their third eye and their mutated forms. The family dog, Santa's little helper, has the same protuberant eyes as his owners, the same slightly off proportions. The wildlife in and around Springfield shows the same physical divergence from normal biology that the residents show. The show has been telling this story in color from the very beginning. The yellow was always the signal. The three-eyed fish was always the confirmation. And the difference between how Springfield residents look and how everyone else looks was always the comparison point that the show embedded in its own visual grammar, quietly, episode after episode, for 36 years. The explanation that everyone accepts is that this is just the art style, and that explanation is almost certainly the correct one in terms of what the creators consciously intended. But Springfield has been yellow for so long that it looks normal now. And that is perhaps the most Springfield thing about it. Section 3. Homer's Mind and the Coma Theory. There is a theory about The Simpsons so well constructed, so consistent with the show's own evidence, and so quietly devastating in its implications that it has never gone away. It was proposed years ago on the internet by a user known as Hard Topic A Name, and once you hear it, it reorganizes everything you have ever watched. Not in a way that ruins the show. In a way that makes the show more heartbreaking and more beautiful simultaneously. The theory is this. Homer Simpson went into a coma in April of 1993, and he never woke up. Every episode of the show that aired before that date is real. Every episode after it is a dream. Let us move through this slowly. The episode in question is called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. It aired on the 1st of April 1993. It was the 18th episode of the show's 4th season. The premise involves Bart playing increasingly elaborate April Fool's pranks on Homer. The escalation builds to Bart taking one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and placing it inside an industrial paint shaker. He shakes the can until it is pressurized to an extreme degree, and then he puts it back in the refrigerator for Homer to find. Homer finds it. He opens it. The resulting explosion is violent enough to send him to the hospital. This is played for laughs. The Simpsons is a comedy. Homer going to the hospital is not a plot development, it is a punchline. The family visits. Homer lies in his hospital bed, recovering, and he sees a vending machine across the room. He wants a candy bar. He rocks the machine to get it. The machine tips over and crushes him. Homer Simpson flatlines. Not in a dream sequence. Not in a cutaway gag. In the canonical reality of the show, Homer's heart stops. He enters a coma. A real, medical coma. The episode ends with Homer appearing to wake up. Bart is at his bedside, tearfully confessing that the prank was his fault, that he is sorry, that he did not mean for any of this to happen. Homer springs awake, apparently fine, and immediately begins strangling Bart. The family laughs. Homer laughs, and then tells the audience that he does not know why he is laughing. The screen cuts to the credits. And in the final moments of that episode, before it ends, the show mentions that Homer lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5% gone permanently, destroyed by whatever happened to his brain during the time his heart was stopped. Homer learns this fact, laughs, and moves on. That is where the show leaves it. A man is told he has sustained permanent, irreversible neurological damage, and the joke is that he finds this funny without understanding why he finds it funny. Now look at what happens to the show after that episode. Before April of 1993, The Simpsons was something specific. It was a grounded domestic comedy, ambitious in its satire, genuinely funny, but rooted in recognizable human situations. A family dealing with financial stress, a husband and wife navigating marital tension, a son struggling at school, a daughter too intelligent for her environment. These were stories about the particular anxiety of middle-class American life in the late 20th century, told through the exaggeration of animation. Homer got drunk. Homer lost his job. Homer and Marge argued about money. Bart failed a test and faced the genuine possibility of being held back a grade. Lisa developed a crush on a teacher who treated her like a real intellect and then left, taking that brief glimpse of being seen with him. The emotional weight of the show came from its rootedness. The jokes were funny because they were built on top of situations that felt true. After the coma episode, everything changes. The change is not subtle. It is not a gradual drift. It is a seismic shift in the kind of reality the show is willing to depict. And it happens in a way that is so dramatic, so complete, that 20 years of internet discussion have been trying to name it without quite finding the right language. Homer goes to space. He becomes the safety inspector at a nuclear facility, which he had always been, but now the job begins to function as a portal into increasingly surreal situations. He travels to dozens of countries. He holds hundreds of different jobs across different seasons. He joins a secret society with real power. He befriends dozens of celebrities and encounters historical figures. He meets God twice, in direct face-to-face conversations. His marriage is threatened and restored repeatedly at levels of drama that the early show never approached. The world around Homer expands exponentially. Springfield, which was once a recognizable American town with familiar rhythms, becomes a place where literally anything can happen. The show begins to operate in a kind of supercharged reality where the stakes are perpetually inflated and the consequences are perpetually reset. A typical early season episode involves Homer trying to win a bowling trophy or Bart trying to get out of trouble at school. A typical later season episode involves Homer discovering a lost city or accidentally becoming the Pope. This shift is what fans mean when they say the show got worse. They are pointing at the departure from groundedness, the move away from the relatable and toward the spectacular. The internet has argued about when exactly this tipping point occurred for decades, and the answers people give cluster loosely around the 4th and 5th seasons, with some saying 6th, some saying 8th. The coma theory proposes that the answer is precise. The shift did not happen because writers changed. It happened because Homer's brain deteriorated. The escalating surrealism of the show is not a decline in writing quality. It is a faithful representation of what happens to a dreaming mind as it loses function over time. Dreams that begin coherently, rooted in real memory and real emotion, gradually become more distorted, more fragmented, more subject to the logic of wish fulfillment than the logic of reality. A brain running a simulation at half capacity produces different results than a brain running a simulation at full capacity. The later episodes do not follow the rules of the earlier ones because they are being generated by less of a brain. The evidence accumulates from multiple directions. 6 months before the coma episode, in the season 4 premiere, there is a scene that sits in the theory like a keystone. The episode is called Homer the Heretic. In it, Homer has a face-to-face conversation with God, not a symbolic vision. Not a dream sequence that the show marks as a dream, a direct voice and face conversation between Homer Simpson and the Almighty, in which God promises Homer that he will eventually learn the meaning of life, but that his time has not yet come. God tells Homer that his time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. Taken as a theological gag, the scene is charming. God told Homer something was going to happen, and 6 months later, something happened. Funny coincidence. Good structural callback. Taken as foreshadowing, the scene means something different. God was telling Homer that his conscious life was approaching its end, that the waking world, the real world, was almost finished with him, that everything that came after would be different in a way Homer could not prepare for. The promise of learning the meaning of life, in this reading, is not a joke about divine mystery. It is a description of what coma patients sometimes report. People who have been pulled back from clinical death sometimes describe experiences of profound understanding, of meaning that cannot be communicated in language, of something that felt more real than waking life. Homer, in his coma dream, may be living out exactly what God promised him. He is learning something. It is just not the kind of learning that translates back into the world of the living. The aging problem is where the coma theory becomes impossible to argue away. Nobody in Springfield ages. This is the foundational impossibility of the show, the thing that every long-term viewer has absorbed so completely that it no longer registers as strange. Bart is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old since 1989. Lisa is 8. Maggie is 1. Homer and Marge are in their mid-30s, approximately, and have been for 36 years of real-world time. Other theories attempt to explain this. The radiation theory suggests that the cellular biology of Springfield's inhabitants has been mutated in ways that prevent normal aging processes from occurring. The floating timeline explanation, which is the official production explanation, says that the characters exist in a permanent present tense, always living in whatever year the current episode is set, with their ages fixed because the show requires it. Both of these explanations are reasonable. Both carry weight. But the coma theory has the simplest, most emotionally direct answer to the aging question of any theory that has ever been applied to the show. Nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen memory of a man who went to sleep in April 1993. Homer's children cannot grow up in the dream. His brain does not have the information to construct their futures because he was not there to see them. He missed everything. He missed Bart turning 11, 12, 15, 20. He missed Lisa's graduation. He missed Maggie's first word. He missed all of it because he was lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General while it happened, or did not happen, or happened in a version of the world that his sleeping mind cannot access. The dream preserves what the dreamer knew at the moment of going under. Bart was 10 when Homer went into the coma. Bart is 10 in every dream Homer has had since. Lisa was 8. Lisa is still 8. Maggie was 1. Maggie has been 1 for every week of every year since April 1993, floating in the amber of her father's last memory of her, small and warm and present in the way that very small children are present, completely and specifically real. Marge does not age because the last time Homer truly saw her, held her, was present with her, she looked exactly like that. The face Homer carries of Marge is the face she had in 1993. That is the face she will always have in the dream, because that is the face his brain has to work from. This is not cartoon logic. This is the logic of grief and memory. The way the people we love look in our minds when we have been separated from them too long is always the way they looked the last time we saw them clearly. The version of a person that lives in our imagination is the version that was standing in front of us when the memory was made. Homer's coma dream is not a supernatural phenomenon. It is the completely ordinary function of a sleeping brain trying to hold on to the people it loves using, the only materials it has. The celebrities deserve attention here because the later seasons of the show are flooded with them in a way the early seasons are not. Beginning roughly around the mid-90s and accelerating from there, Springfield becomes a kind of magnet for famous people. Musicians, athletes, actors, politicians, historical figures in dream sequences, the famous are everywhere. Under normal viewing conditions, this is attributed to the show's cultural prominence. The Simpsons had become the most watched and most referenced piece of American television in the 90s, and getting a guest spot on it was a cultural signal of a particular kind of significance. The show attracted celebrities because the show was where celebrities went to demonstrate that they understood the culture they were living in. All of that is true. And yet, a coma patient lying in a hospital room is receiving input from the outside world even while unconscious. Sound travels through closed eyelids. Television in the background of a hospital room fills the air with voices and names and music. Family members sitting at the bedside might talk about what is happening in the news, mention a film they saw, hum a song that is popular. The brain of a coma patient, even while not generating conscious experience in the way waking brains do, is still processing, still receiving, still incorporating. The celebrity appearances in Homer's dream, in this reading, are the names and voices that filtered through the fog of the hospital room. His family watching television at his bedside, his nurses and doctors talking, the radio playing in the background. All of these inputs become characters in the dream. The brain cannot distinguish between a celebrity it remembers from before the coma and a celebrity whose name it is hearing for the first time through the ambient noise of a hospital room. It inserts them both. It gives them form. It makes them real within the parameters of the only world it has left. Every celebrity who appears in Springfield in the later seasons is, possibly, a voice Homer heard once while he was somewhere else entirely. There is a scene near the end of the episode where Homer appears to wake up, and Bart is crying at his bedside. In the scene, Bart confesses his guilt. He says he is sorry. He says he never meant for this to happen. And Homer wakes up and strangles him, and the family laughs. The coma theory asks, what if Homer did not wake up in that moment? What if the waking up is itself part of the dream? What if the brain, constructing the most desperately wanted outcome it could imagine, constructed the image of Homer opening his eyes to his crying son, constructed the feeling of Bart in his hands, constructed the laughter of his family gathered around him? Because that is what Homer's mind needed more than anything else in the world? Not to be healed, not to recover. Just to see Bart crying at his bedside because Bart loved him enough to cry. What if Homer heard Bart's real voice, in the real hospital room, saying something he could not fully understand, and his dreaming brain turned it into a confession of love? The executive producer Al Jean addressed the coma theory directly in 2015. He said it was not true. He said it was fan speculation. He was brief and definitive. What he did not address was why the show stopped making sense after the coma episode in any way consistent with its own previous logic. He did not address the tonal shift. He did not address the aging freeze. He did not address why God told Homer his time was coming 6 months before the coma. He dismissed the theory, and the interviewer moved on. And the theory did not move on because theories built on structural evidence do not respond to the dismissals of the people they are about. The show itself engaged with the theory more directly in its 34th season, in an episode called Lisa the Boy Scout. The show produced a deliberately leaked, fake-deleted scene in which Homer wakes from a long coma, and it is revealed that every outlandish episode was a dream. The scene was fully animated, fully voiced, and clearly created as a direct response to the fan theory. The show then told audiences it was a fake, planted by hackers, not a real deleted scene at all, but the show made it. The writers animated the scene where Homer wakes up. They gave it to the world and then said it was not real. There is a particular kind of acknowledgement in that gesture. You do not animate a hoax denial unless the thing you are denying has enough weight to require a formal response. You do not construct a fake deleted scene about waking up from a coma unless the coma theory has been living in the building with you long enough that you need to address it somehow, even if the address takes the form of a joke. The show told you the truth and said it was a lie. Homer laughed when he was told he had lost 5% of his brain. The town laughed when he laughed. The audience laughed. And nobody stopped to consider what it means to lose 5% of something you cannot afford to lose. Maybe nothing. Maybe it means nothing. Or maybe Homer Simpson has been dreaming in a Springfield hospital since April of 1993, and every week we tune in to watch a man's unconscious mind write love letters to the family he cannot reach, in the only medium available to him, dreams that never end, in a town that never changes. where his children are always young and his wife always waits and the couch is always warm and nobody ever has to say goodbye. The theory does not ruin the show. It makes the show almost unbearably tender. Let that sit for a while. Let the room get a little quieter. Let Springfield settle in the dark behind your eyes like a town seen from a great distance, lit up faintly, snow on the hills, a faint green glow from the cooling towers on the edge of town. Homer is somewhere in there dreaming. Section 4. The nuclear heart of Springfield. At the center of everything, at the literal and figurative heart of Springfield, there is a building. It is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It sits on the edge of town with its cooling towers rising against whatever sky the episode gives it, sometimes gray with morning fog, sometimes orange at sunset, sometimes a flat Midwestern blue. The building is always there. In the establishing shot of Springfield that the show uses most consistently, the cooling towers are visible on the skyline the way the Eiffel Tower is visible in establishing shots of Paris, the way Times Square defines the New York City establishing shot. The power plant is the visual vocabulary of Springfield. It is the first thing you see and the last thing you forget. The Springfield nuclear power plant is owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns. It is the primary source of electrical power for the entire town. Every light in every house, every television playing in every living room, every refrigerator humming in every kitchen runs on electricity generated by that facility. Springfield is, in the most literal sense, powered by Burns. The infrastructure of daily life runs through him. And the facility is, by any reasonable measurement, a catastrophe being deferred one safety violation at a time. A surprise inspection found 342 violations. The number is important. Not 3 violations, not 30. 342 distinct, documented, individually cataloged failures of safety protocol, structural integrity, materials handling, waste management, and basic operational competence. The estimated cost to bring the plant up to code was $56 million. Burns, a billionaire many times over, a man with enough personal wealth to buy and sell entire governments, refused to spend it. The show treats this as character information. Burns is greedy. Burns values profit over safety. Burns will not spend money he does not have to spend. That is the joke, and it works as a joke because greed is a recognizable human trait, and a billionaire expressing it on a grand scale is satisfying satire. But the 342 violations are not an abstraction, they are a list. And the items on the list, when you sit with them, are not funny. Radioactive waste being dumped directly into waterways. This is not the controlled release of minimally contaminated water that nuclear facilities are permitted to discharge under specific regulatory conditions. This is waste, the kind of material that is supposed to be contained, isolated, transported to licensed disposal sites in sealed containers, being dumped into the rivers and streams that Springfield's residents fish in, that Springfield's children play beside, that Springfield's water treatment infrastructure draws from. Radioactive waste found on children's playgrounds. Glowing rods discovered on the ground where children play. The half-life of nuclear fuel material is measured in decades, in centuries. The rods that a child might pick up on a playground, if they are glowing, are actively emitting radiation. The child who holds one, the child who sits near one, the child who goes home without knowing what they touched, carries something home. Plutonium being used as a paperweight. This is presented as a comic image. A paperweight, something you put on your desk to keep papers from moving in a draft. And plutonium, one of the most toxic and radioactive materials human beings have ever synthesized, is sitting on someone's desk at the Springfield nuclear power plant, casually, serving a purpose for which any number of non-radioactive objects would function equally well. The cooling towers are cracked, not metaphorically, structurally cracked, with those cracks patched using chewing gum. Whatever a cooling tower releases when its containment is compromised, whatever makes its way through the cracked concrete and the gum patch and out into the atmosphere, is going somewhere. It is going into the air. It is going into the water table. It is going into the ground under the residential neighborhoods that Springfield has built in the shadow of those towers over the decades. And then there are the skeletons in the basement. The show mentions this once. Human skeletons discovered in the basement of the nuclear power plant during an inspection. The inspector notes them. The show moves on. Nobody asks who those people were. Nobody asks how a working nuclear facility came to have human remains in its basement. Nobody opens an investigation. The bones are cataloged as a violation alongside the cracked cooling towers and the mishandled plutonium and the waste in the waterways, and then everyone goes home. Except the skeletons stay. They are still there, in whatever section of the show's canon contains things that were mentioned once and never explained. Human skeletons in the basement of the building that provides Springfield with its electricity. The building that Homer Simpson goes to every day. The building where Homer Simpson sits at his workstation in Sector 7G and sometimes falls asleep at his console. The safety inspector responsible for preventing all of this. The single person whose professional function is to stand between Springfield and radioactive catastrophe is Homer Simpson. The show's own creator has stated that Homer has an IQ of 55. This is not a joke about Homer being a little slow. An IQ of 55 is a clinical designation. It is below the threshold for intellectual disability, which is typically set at around 70. An IQ of 55 represents significant cognitive limitation, difficulty with complex reasoning, difficulty with abstract thinking, difficulty processing the kind of information that a nuclear safety inspector is required to process and act on. There is also the crayon. Season 12 reveals that Homer once had a crayon removed from his brain, a crayon that had been lodged in his frontal lobe since childhood, and that his IQ immediately rose to genius level. He became articulate, perceptive, capable of understanding the world around him in ways he could not manage before the removal. His cognitive function, freed from the obstruction, performed at a level that the show identifies as genuinely exceptional. He chose to have the crayon put back. We will return to why he made that choice. But the relevant point here is the crayon's presence, not its removal. Homer Simpson worked as a nuclear safety inspector with a crayon lodged in his frontal lobe. He submitted safety reports. He sat at the console during operating hours. He was, nominally, the person ensuring that the facility's operations did not result in a disaster, and a foreign object was compressing his brain the entire time. How did that crayon get there? The episode presents the origin as a childhood accident that nobody ever caught. Homer, as a child, accidentally pushed a crayon up his nose and it traveled to his brain. He grew up in Springfield. He saw Springfield doctors. He received medical checkups from Springfield's healthcare system throughout his childhood and adolescence and adult life. Not one of those examinations detected a crayon in his skull. Either Springfield's medical establishment is operating at a level of incompetence that would be extraordinary even by this show's standards, or someone new. Or the infrastructure of Springfield's healthcare system, which, like its electrical infrastructure and its regulatory infrastructure, ultimately traces back to the influence of the man who owns the town's primary employer, had reasons to allow certain things to remain unaddressed. The man who benefits most from Homer's cognitive limitations, the man who hired Homer and keeps hiring him despite an unprecedented record of workplace failure, is Burns. When German investors briefly acquired the Springfield nuclear power plant during one episode, the first thing they did was fire Homer. The second thing they did was conduct a thorough safety assessment, and the estimate for bringing the facility up to code nearly bankrupted them. They sold the plant back to Burns at a loss, and Burns immediately rehired Homer. A competent safety inspector would shut the plant down within weeks. Homer does not shut anything down. Homer sleeps at his workstation. Homer eats donuts during meltdown warnings. Homer once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut at the reactor core to see if it would grow larger. This is documented, in the show, as a thing that actually happened. Homer is not employed at the plant despite his incompetence. Homer is employed at the plant because of it. His incompetence is the product Burns is purchasing. The violations continue. The waste leaks, the cooling towers keep cracking and being patched, and the town continues to receive its electricity from the building that is slowly, methodically, continuously saturating its water and its air and its soil with whatever the cracked infrastructure releases. There is another piece to this, a piece that connects the plant to the town in a way that the show has never quite acknowledged directly, but has demonstrated repeatedly. The town's economy depends on the plant. The plant employs a significant portion of Springfield's working population, directly and through the businesses that serve people who work there. The local government is in Burns's pocket, as multiple episodes have established across multiple seasons, because an elected official who challenges Burns risks losing the plant, which means losing the jobs, which means losing the tax base, which means losing the town. Springfield cannot afford to regulate Burns. The town's survival, as currently configured, requires Burns to keep operating. The violations continue because the alternative to the violations is accountability, and accountability leads to closure, and closure leads to economic collapse, and economic collapse leads to everyone who is not Burns having nowhere to work and nothing to eat and no lights in their homes. So the violations continue. The chewing gum stays in the cracks, the waste goes in the water, the skeletons stay in the basement, Homer stays at the console, and the town, whose electricity runs through the building Homer is not adequately supervising, keeps receiving its power and not asking too many questions about the price. The physical town of Springfield shows the effects of this arrangement in ways that go beyond the three-eyed fish. The tire fire, which has been burning in the background of Springfield's skyline for decades, produces smoke that contributes to the air quality of the town. The tannery, which appears in several episodes, dumps runoff into local waterways alongside whatever the plant is releasing. Springfield's industrial infrastructure, in aggregate, is a catalog of environmental hazards that individually would represent significant public health concerns. Together, concentrated in and around a single town's water table and air supply, they represent something else. They represent a cumulative load on the biology of everyone living there. And everyone living there is yellow. And everyone living there heals from things that should not be healable. And everyone living there has eyes that protrude slightly, and 4 fingers on each hand, and hair that grows in geometrically stable configurations, and an apparent inability to remember, from week to week, the catastrophes that the town has survived. The plant is not background detail. The plant is the explanation. Every strange thing about Springfield, every biological impossibility, every cognitive limitation, every reset and every erasure, and every yellow face in every crowd scene traces back to the building on the edge of town with the cracked cooling towers and the chewing gum patches and the skeletons nobody talks about in the basement. The show put all of this in front of us. It distributed the evidence across 36 years of episodes, hiding it in plain sight, trusting that familiarity would function like camouflage. We see the cooling towers every week. We know the safety record. We know about the three-eyed fish. We know what Homer does and does not do at his workstation. We know all of it. And we accepted it as the background noise of a cartoon town, the same way Springfield's residents accept it as the background noise of their lives. The plant is not a joke. The plant is not a setting. The plant is the story. It has always been the story. Let that settle, quietly, in the dark. The cooling towers are still there on the horizon. The glow from the facility is soft and constant. Everything in Springfield runs on what that building produces. And the town keeps the lights on and asks nothing further. There is something particular about the way you know Springfield before you know anything else about it. Before you have seen more than a handful of episodes, before you have any depth in the characters or the running gags or the emotional through lines that the show has been building for decades, you know Springfield. You know the skyline. You know the color of the light there, that particular yellow-orange mid-afternoon quality that the show's animation gives to almost every exterior establishing shot. You know the sound of the neighborhood, the particular background hum of a mid-sized American town that has the same relationship to silence that a highway overpass does. Sound is always present, but it has receded into familiarity, and you stop hearing it the way you stop hearing your own refrigerator. Springfield lives in the part of the memory reserved for things that have always been there, and that familiarity is itself a kind of mystery. When you sit with it, The Simpsons is a show about a specific family in a specific house on a specific street in a specific town. It is built around particularity. Homer is not just any father. He is Homer Simpson, with the specific overbite and the 5 o'clock shadow that is always exactly the same 5 o'clock shadow, and the particular vocal quality of Dan Castellaneta doing something extraordinary with a character who should, by rights, have been a simple cartoon figure and became instead one of the most recognizable voices in the history of recorded audio. Marge is not any mother. She is Marge, with the specific blue tower of hair and the specific hum of anxious affection she makes when something is about to go wrong, and she has decided to hold her reaction until after the thing goes wrong, so that Homer does not feel preemptively criticized. These are specific people in a specific place. The specificity is the point. The comedy comes from precision. And yet Springfield, the specific place where these specific people live, has no specific location. It is everywhere and it is nowhere. And it has been both of those things simultaneously for 36 years. And the remarkable quality of that achievement is that almost nobody notices it as an achievement. The geographic vagueness of Springfield is so thoroughly normalized that it has become invisible. One more piece of background furniture in a show built from furniture the audience stopped seeing decades ago. Pull it back into the light, though, and it becomes something genuinely strange. Think about any other long-running American drama or sitcom set in a specific location. Friends takes place in New York in a way that is specific and verifiable. Breaking Bad takes place in Albuquerque in a way that any Albuquerque resident can recognize and engage with. The Sopranos takes place in New Jersey in a way that carries the weight of that particular geography, the particular flatness and the particular industrial texture, and the particular relationship to New York City that defines a certain kind of New Jersey experience. Those shows are in conversation with their locations. The place is part of the story. The story could not be exactly this story if it happened somewhere else. The geography is not background. It is material. Springfield has no geography in that sense. Springfield could be in Ohio, and the stories would be the same. It could be in Oregon or Nevada or Kentucky or Maine, and the stories would not change, because Springfield was designed from the beginning to have no geographic commitments that might limit who the show was speaking to. It is every town. It is the town in everyone's memory that is slightly too large to be a small town, and slightly too small to be a city, and which has a nuclear plant and a tire fire and a river and a mountain that you can see from the highway if the weather is clear. Every American over a certain age grew up near a version of Springfield. The specific details differ. The emotional geography is identical. Now, consider what it takes to maintain this. The show has been running for 36 years. It has had hundreds of writers cycle through its writer's room across those decades. New writers come in, absorb the show's conventions, and produce episodes that fit within the established universe. The established universe includes the geographic ambiguity of Springfield, and maintaining that ambiguity while the show produces episode after episode after episode requires active effort. Every time a writer puts a state reference in a script, it has to be caught and neutralized. Every time a direction clue appears in a scene, it has to be balanced against a contradicting clue elsewhere. The vagueness is not passive, it is maintained. You can see the active maintenance in the show's history. Multiple times across its run, the show has appeared to commit to a location, only to immediately reverse the commitment. A state abbreviation appears on a license plate and fans build theories around it. 2 episodes later, a different abbreviation appears on a different plate. A zip code is mentioned and analyzed by fans who use it to narrow the geographic range to a handful of states. A subsequent episode places Springfield's climate in a context inconsistent with those states. The show is playing with you. It is deliberately taunting the question it has spent 36 years refusing to answer. It lays trails and then removes them. It offers clues and then discredits them. It has been engaged in a sustained, slow-motion conversation with its own audience about the unanswerable question at its center, and the conversation has taken the form of 36 years of elaborate, affectionate deflection. When Matt Groening answered the question in 2012, the answer lasted exactly as long as the interview. The show resumed its ambiguity the following week. Groening's answer was personal truth. He named the town after a place from his own geographic history. The show's truth is different. Springfield belongs to everyone, and belonging to everyone requires belonging to nowhere in particular. There is a version of this that is deeply intentional, a philosophical statement about universality and the construction of shared cultural space. And that version is probably the correct explanation for why the show was built this way in the first place. Groening wanted the show to feel like it was for everyone, and geographic specificity would have been a form of exclusion. Springfield, Oregon is in Oregon. Springfield everywhere is in your memory. But there is also a version of this that is darker, and the darker version sits alongside the intentional one without contradicting it, two truths in the same space. Think about what it would mean if Springfield were locatable. If there were a fixed address, a specific state, a definite regulatory jurisdiction, the plant would have a specific state environmental protection agency to contend with. The safety violations, all 342 of them, would fall under the jurisdiction of a specific state's attorney general, a specific state's nuclear regulatory authority, a specific state's Department of Environmental Quality. Burns would be accountable to a specific set of laws in a specific place with specific enforcement mechanisms. A town with no fixed location has no fixed accountability. The violations float between jurisdictions the same way the timeline floats between years. Nobody can cite Springfield in a court filing because nobody can establish which court has jurisdiction. Nobody can issue a cease and desist to the plant because nobody can determine which regulatory body has authority over a facility that is geographically ambiguous. Springfield's geographic impossibility is not just a comedy device. It is a legal architecture. It is the built environment of a town that has, for reasons that connect back to the man who owns its primary employer, arranged itself so that the mechanisms of accountability cannot find their footing. Burns did not design Springfield's geography, but Burns benefits from it. The town that cannot be located cannot be regulated. And in Springfield, the inability to be regulated has been the functional equivalent of immunity. The geography is the jurisdiction. The jurisdiction is missing. The violations continue. Let the town sit in that ambiguity for a moment. It is out there somewhere, between every state and none of them. The cooling towers are visible from the highway. The tire fire is still burning. The three-eyed fish are still in the river. You just cannot quite put it on a map. Let us spend a little more time with the color, because the color is worth dwelling on, worth sitting with, worth holding up to whatever light you can find in the room where you are right now, and turning over carefully. Yellow is not a neutral choice. In the long history of human art, yellow is one of the most emotionally loaded colors in the palette. It is the color of sunlight and of gold, and of the particular warm tone of late afternoon that photographers and cinematographers call the golden hour. It is the color of happiness, in the visual shorthand that human cultures developed over millennia of associating the sun with well-being. Yellow is good. Yellow is also the color of sickness. The jaundice that turns skin yellow is the body broadcasting distress. The yellowing of the whites of the eyes is a signal. The yellowing of the skin in conditions of liver failure or biliary obstruction is the body's tissue becoming saturated with bilirubin, a compound that the liver is supposed to process and eliminate but cannot when the liver is compromised. Yellow skin, in medical contexts, is never a sign of health. It is always a sign of something failing. The people of Springfield are the same color as their sun, which is either optimistic, a golden people living in golden light, or it is something else entirely, a population whose bodies have reached the color that ill bodies reach when the filtering systems inside them have been degraded past their capacity to compensate. The show chose yellow. It chose it for practical reasons, as Matt Groening has explained. Yellow skin on animation stands out on a television screen. The color is bright and distinctive, and works technically in a way that a more naturalistic skin tone would not. This is a true explanation. It is complete as a production history. But the color is in the show now. It has been in the show for 36 years. Whatever the original reason for choosing it, the color has accumulated meaning through proximity to the story, the way objects accumulate the particular resonance of where they have been. The yellow of Springfield is the yellow of a place that has been saturated with something, and the show, aware of this or not, has built an elaborate set of reasons for why a town might be saturated. When outsiders arrive in Springfield, the contrast becomes visible. The animators give visiting characters more natural proportions, more realistic eyes, coloring that falls within a broader range of human skin tones. The contrast is visible and consistent across hundreds of episodes. The people inside Springfield look one way, the people from outside look another way. The visual difference is drawn into the show's grammar as clearly as any plot point, and it operates the same way that the three-eyed fish operates, as an indicator, placed in the show's visual language, of something that distinguishes the population of Springfield from the populations elsewhere. What distinguishes them is where they live. Consider also the fingers. 4 fingers on each hand is the standard for animation because it is simpler and more visually readable than 5, and the four-finger convention in American cartoons goes back to the early days of the medium. It is a purely technical choice, and almost every animated character in the history of the medium follows it. That said, within the world of Springfield, the four-fingered hands of every resident are not a convention, they are a fact. The characters live in a world where they have four fingers on each hand. And in that world, the question of why they have four fingers is a live question. When we accept four fingers as cartoon convention, we are applying real-world logic to the show's internal universe. Within the show's internal universe, these are people with four fingers. People with four fingers. Consistently across an entire population, exclusively in one geographic location, the medical literature on polydactyly, the presence of extra digits, and on oligodactyly, the absence of expected digits, is not a literature about normal variation. These are conditions. They arise from specific developmental disruptions, genetic or environmental, that alter the formation of the hands and feet during embryonic development. They are not the standard human pattern. They are deviations from it. Springfield's residents all have the same deviation. Not a range of variations, but the same specific deviation. Four fingers, every person, every generation depicted in the show. A mutation that has become stable across an entire population is a mutation that was introduced at a point far enough back that it has now been bred into the baseline biology of the people born and raised in that environment. Or a mutation that is continuously reinforced by ongoing exposure to whatever is producing it, so that each generation born in Springfield is born into the same environmental pressure that produced the mutation in the first place. Not a legacy mutation from a founding event. A continuous mutation from a continuous cause. The plant has been running since before any of the current characters were born. The water table contamination, if it exists, and the show provides considerable evidence that it does, would have been affecting the reproductive biology of Springfield's population for decades. A child born to parents who have been drinking that water for their entire lives, who grew in a womb inside a mother whose cells are saturated with whatever the plant releases, who breathed Springfield's air from their first breath, is not experiencing the contamination fresh. They are a second or third generation product of that contamination. Their baseline is different from the baseline of someone born and raised elsewhere. This is not science fiction. This is how environmental contamination works at a population level when it is sustained across sufficient time. The body adapts. The adaptation passes. The adapted form begins to feel normal because within that environment, it is the form that survives and reproduces. Springfield's residents look the way they look because Springfield made them that way. The yellow is not a cartoon convention. Within the show's logic, the yellow is a symptom. The four fingers are not an animation shortcut. Within the show's logic, the four fingers are the inheritance of several generations of living inside a contamination zone. The show drew these people the way it drew them for completely practical, completely explainable production reasons. And then the show built an elaborate environment around them that explains, accidentally or deliberately, why people who have been living in that environment for generations would look exactly like that. The thing about the coma theory that makes it so durable, so persistent across the years since it was first proposed, is that it does something that almost no fan theory manages to do. It makes the show better. Not just more interesting, though it does that. It makes the emotional content of the show land harder. It gives weight to things that are funny on the surface. It turns what looks like cartoon logic into something that functions like grief. Most fan theories are either solving a puzzle or creating one. They take something the show did and add an explanation. The coma theory is different because it changes what everything means. Every episode you have ever watched becomes, under the coma theory, a different kind of story. Not a different story. The same story, but read in a different key. Consider the episodes that deal most directly with Homer's relationship to his family. The ones where he tries to be a better father and fails. The ones where Marge's patience runs out and the marriage is genuinely threatened. The ones where Bart needs Homer to show up in a specific way and Homer is not capable of being the father the moment requires. These are all standard plots for a domestic comedy. They are well-executed versions of situations that family sitcoms have used for decades. They work as comedy and occasionally as genuine emotion. Under the coma theory, they are something else. They are a sleeping man working out his fears. The episodes where Homer fails as a father are Homer's unconscious mind rehearsing the anxiety that every imperfect parent carries. What if I am not enough? What if I am hurting them more than helping? What if the love is there but the competence is not, and competence is what they actually need? Homer's brain is not generating these episodes as entertainment. It is processing. It is the way that sleep processes the emotional material that the waking mind could not fully digest. The unresolved anxieties come up in the dream in story form, and the dream works through them, and Homer finds his way back to his family at the end of the episode because the dream will not allow any other conclusion. The dream requires that he come home. The dream requires that the family still be there when he does. The Marge episodes are the most devastating ones to think about in this context. The episodes where Marge is genuinely unhappy, where her patience has been stretched past its natural limit, and she is sitting in the kitchen or the bedroom, looking at her life, and doing the arithmetic of a woman who has been giving more than she has been receiving for a very long time. Those episodes are painful to watch because Julie Kavner brings something completely real to Marge's unhappiness. The character is a cartoon, but the feeling she communicates is not. Under the coma theory, those episodes are Homer's deepest fear being processed in sleep. The fear that Marge has been giving more than she receives. The fear that her patience is not infinite. The fear that one day the arithmetic will come out wrong and she will look at the numbers and decide that the life she has been building around a man who cannot always be what she needs is not the life she is going to continue building, and then the episode ends and Marge is there. She is always still there. The dream does not allow her to leave. Homer's unconscious mind generates the fear, runs the simulation, and then resolves the simulation in the only way it can tolerate. She stays. He does not lose her. The family remains intact. The dream protects him, not from the fear, but from the conclusion. He can feel the fear. The dream will not let him feel the loss. There is also the structural argument, separate from the emotional one. And the structural argument is the one that is hardest to dismiss. The shift in the show's reality after the coma episode is not subtle or ambiguous. The first 4 seasons of the show operate within recognizable parameters of domestic comedy. Extraordinary things happen, yes, because this is animation and extraordinary things are available. But the extraordinary things are sized to fit the world the show has established. They are big enough to be funny and small enough to be believable. After the coma, the show operates in a different register. The size of what happens to Homer changes in a way that is not a gradual drift, but an abrupt relocation. He goes to space. That is not a gradual expansion of the show's parameters. That is a fundamental break with the logic of a show about a working-class family in a mid-sized American town. Working-class men who work at nuclear power plants do not go to space. The show sends Homer to space not because the character's trajectory made this a plausible development, but because, in the reading that the coma theory offers, the dreaming brain began to generate wishes instead of fears. Before the coma, Homer's dreams are anxious. After the coma, Homer's dreams begin to fulfill desires. He meets the president, he befriends celebrities, he travels the world. He discovers that he is capable of remarkable things in field after field after field. The man who in real life sat at a console in Sector 7G and sometimes fell asleep, in the dream becomes a person of almost unlimited possibility. This is the specific texture of wish fulfillment dreaming, the scenarios that come when the brain is constructing what it wants rather than what it fears. The promotions, the adventures, the meetings with important people, the discovery of hidden competencies. The dreaming mind is generous with itself in ways the waking mind is not. It gives the dreamer what the waking life withheld. And the adventures are increasingly impossible because the brain generating them has, as the theory holds, been deteriorating since 1993. A brain in its first year of coma generates relatively coherent dreams. After 5 years, after 10, after 30, the coherence phrase. The internal logic of the dream becomes looser. Things happen that in the earlier dream would have required more setup and more justification. Connections between events become more tenuous. Causality becomes softer. The world of the dream becomes more responsive to emotional truth than to logical consistency. This is why the later seasons feel different. This is what the critics who say the show got worse after its golden age are sensing without being able to name. They are not sensing a decline in writing quality, though individual episodes may exhibit that. They are sensing a change in the quality of the dream. The dream is older now. The brain generating it has been running on diminished resources for a long time. The coherence of the early seasons is the coherence of a brain that was still relatively intact. The surrealism of the later seasons is the surrealism of a brain that has been away for a very long time and is finding it harder to hold the simulation together. The reset button between episodes is the clearest evidence of this. In the early seasons, the resets feel like conventions, the necessary mechanics of episodic storytelling. Characters cannot remember the events of previous episodes because the show's structure requires a fresh start each week. Standard practice. As the seasons accumulate, the resets become something else. Events happen of such magnitude that forgetting them is not a convention, it is an impossibility. The dome, the sun being blocked, the town being destroyed and rebuilt. These are not the kinds of events that communities forget between weeks. These are generational traumas, the kind of thing that shapes a place for decades, that gets written into architecture and memory, and the particular way people in that place talk about the years when things went very wrong. Springfield forgets them in 7 days. The dreaming brain cannot hold the consequences of everything it has generated. It builds a disaster, runs the disaster, survives the disaster, and then has to clear the working memory to build the next episode. The reset is not lazy writing. It is the brain choosing to release rather than accumulate, because accumulation would require a continuity that the degraded processing cannot maintain. Homer has been dreaming since 1993. The dream has been getting harder to hold together for a long time, but it has not fallen apart, not yet. He is still dreaming. The family is still there. The house is still on Evergreen Terrace and Bart is still 10, and the opening music is still playing at the start of every episode, and Homer is still finding his way home. The dream keeps going, because the dreamer keeps fighting to hold it. Because somewhere in the hospital room where the dream began, the body on the bed is still alive, still breathing, still running the simulation that contains everyone he loves. And the simulation will keep running as long as there is any function left to run it with. Let us spend a moment with the numbers, because the numbers deserve attention, and numbers have a particular ability to make abstract things concrete. 342 violations. Take a single safety violation, a cracked seal on a containment vessel, a pipe that is aging past its rated service life, an emergency shutdown system that has been tested and has returned an ambiguous result. A single one of these things, at a nuclear facility in the real world, triggers a reporting requirement. Depending on severity, it triggers an inspection. Depending on the inspection findings, it can trigger a temporary shutdown while the issue is addressed. A single significant safety violation at a real nuclear power plant is an event. It generates paperwork and regulatory attention and potentially news coverage if the violation is significant enough. 342 of them in a single inspection at a facility that is, in this moment, actively operating, providing power to an entire town, with a safety inspector asleep at his console and a CEO who has made the explicit decision to spend no money on repairs. The number is presented as a joke. The number is delivered in the deadpan tone of someone reading from an official report, and the gap between the gravity of the number and the casual tone of its delivery is where the comedy lies. 342 is so far beyond any recognizable standard that it becomes absurd, and absurd is where the show does its best work. But 342 is also a measurement. It is the show telling you, in the specific language of bureaucratic enumeration, exactly how compromised this facility is. 1 violation would be addressable, 10 would be serious, 100 would be a scandal. 342 is a building that should not be operating, being operated by a man who has decided that the cost of addressing the violations exceeds the cost of the consequences of not addressing them. And the consequences, the show has established, include the three-eyed fish, the yellow population, the skeletons in the basement, the luminescent CEO, and the cognitive fog that prevents anyone in Springfield from connecting those consequences to their source. The economics of this are worth following. The estimated cost to bring the plant up to code was $56 million. Burns is a billionaire. The word billionaire means different things in different contexts. In the context of the Springfield nuclear power plant, it means that the man who owns the facility has resources that exceed the cost of fixing it by a factor of perhaps 20 or 50 or 100, depending on how many billions his fortune represents. The $56 million repair cost is not a burden Burns cannot bear. It is a number Burns has looked at and decided is not worth spending. Because spending it would mean acknowledging that the violations existed, which would open a door he has decided to keep closed. That door leads to a room where someone is allowed to ask what the violations have already done to the community. And that room has another door, and behind that door is the conversation about the contaminated water and the three-eyed fish and the yellow skin and everything else that the town has agreed not to discuss. The $56 million is not a financial obstacle. The $56 million is the price of an admission Burns has decided not to make. Keeping the violations unrepaired is cheaper than acknowledging they exist. Not in money, but in power. Repair the plant, answer the questions, open the doors, and the empire begins to come apart at a seam that Burns has spent decades reinforcing. So the gum stays in the cracks, the waste goes in the water, the safety inspector sleeps. There is something worth considering about the plutonium paperweight specifically. Of all the violations, this one is the most intimate. A radioactive element on someone's desk. Not in a storage facility, not in a containment vessel, not somewhere that implies even a minimal attempt at following safety protocol. On a desk, where a person sits, where a person spends their working day. The person who sits at that desk is being irradiated daily by an object they presumably see every day and have, at some point, stopped noticing. This is a good illustration of how contamination works psychologically at the individual level, which mirrors how it works at the community level in Springfield. The first time you see the plutonium, you are aware of it. It registers. Your body responds to it, or would if you knew to tell your body to respond. Over time, you stop seeing it. It becomes background. The hazard normalizes. The risk that was once acute becomes chronic. And chronic risks are the ones that human perception is least equipped to manage, because the alarm response requires novelty, and chronicity removes novelty. The person sitting next to the plutonium paperweight has habituated to the plutonium paperweight. The town living near the plant has habituated to the plant. The viewers watching the show have habituated to the violations. The characters navigating the story have habituated to the yellow skin and the four fingers, and everything else that the environment has produced in them. This is the show's most sophisticated achievement, and it is probably an accidental one. By presenting Springfield's contamination as background, as the furniture of the show rather than its explicit subject, the show replicates in the viewer the exact psychological process that it is depicting in its characters. We watch for decades and we do not notice the violations accumulating because we have habituated to them the way the residents have. We are, without knowing it, experiencing Springfield from the inside. The show is not showing us a town that has been numbed to its own contamination. The show is numbing us to it in the same way. We are not watching Springfield's denial from a safe distance. We are inside it. Section 5. Burns and the Architecture of Immortality. Charles Montgomery Burns is the oldest man in Springfield. He may be the oldest man in America. He is, within the logic of the show's own established continuity, a biological impossibility maintained in functional form through a combination of extreme wealth, regular medical intervention, and what amounts to a personal infrastructure of survival that he has been building and refining for over a century. His age has never been definitively stated. The show has deliberately left this as an open calculation, providing clues rather than answers, allowing viewers to assemble a timeline that is always slightly longer than comfortable. What we know is this. Burns has personal memories of events from the late 19th century. He has described the Gilded Age as something he experienced firsthand, as something he was present for, as a period he can characterize with the authority of a witness rather than the authority of a historian. He has referenced the Spanish-American War not as something he read about, but as something he lived through. He attended Yale. He served in World War II, though his role in that conflict, as we shall see shortly, was more complex than honorable service. By the most conservative possible interpretation of these clues, Burns is somewhere north of 100 years old. By a less conservative reading, he is approaching 140. Either number places him so far outside the normal human lifespan that simply existing becomes its own kind of achievement. And he does more than exist. He functions. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation with the ruthless efficiency of someone who has been practicing at this for decades, which he has. He manipulates Springfield's municipal politics with the ease of long habit. He identifies weaknesses in people and exploits them with the precision of someone who has had a century to learn how human nature operates under pressure. His mind is not a ruin. His body is frail. Yes, catastrophically so. He has the physical strength of a child and the structural integrity of something you might find pressed between book pages. But his cognition is sharp. His strategy is clear. His understanding of power and money and leverage is the understanding of someone who has been practicing at all three for longer than most institutions have existed. How does he do it? The Springfield Files episode provides the most direct answer the show has ever offered. Homer is walking through the woods near Springfield when he sees a glowing figure emerge from the trees. The figure moves with the unsteady grace of something that is barely maintaining upright posture. It glows with a steady, visible, greenish light that has no natural explanation. Homer, convinced he has witnessed an alien encounter, reports it to the authorities. The FBI sends agents, the town panics, an investigation unfolds. And when the truth is finally revealed, the glowing figure in the woods was Burns. Burns has been undergoing a weekly medical treatment. The treatment is described as so intensive, so saturated with chemicals and radiation therapy, that it temporarily causes his body to emit visible light. After each session, the treatment leaves him in a dazed, euphoric state, and he wanders out of the medical facility into the surrounding woodland to decompress. He literally glows in the dark. The treatments keep him alive for exactly one more week. Without the next treatment, without the following week's dose, he dies. The margin for error is zero. He has no buffer. His life is maintained on a weekly renewal schedule, the way a subscription service requires renewal before it lapses. This is played as a reveal. The alien is just Burns. Funny, move on. But the implications are extraordinary if you choose to follow them. Burns is not surviving through normal biological processes. He is not alive because his cells are functioning as human cells are supposed to function. He is alive because a recurring medical intervention prevents his body from doing what his body, left to its own devices, would do. His life is not a biological process. It is a managed mechanical one. The distinction matters because it means that Burns' survival is entirely dependent on the infrastructure that supports the treatments. If the treatments stop, Burns stops. If the supply chain that delivers whatever is in those treatments is interrupted, Burns dies within a week. He is less a living human being than an extraordinarily elaborate machine that requires servicing. The treatments involve radiation. Of course they do. The man who has spent over a century in proximity to nuclear material, the man who owns and operates a leaking reactor, the man whose own body has been absorbing whatever the plant produces at the epicenter of the contamination, has a physiology that is now dependent on continued radiation exposure to maintain its basic functions. His cells require it. His disease equilibrium requires it. The specific biological state that keeps him functional rather than dead requires the continued presence of whatever the nuclear treatments provide. Burns is not just profiting from radiation, he is powered by it, in the most literal, metabolic sense. This connects to something the show reveals in what is arguably one of its most quoted medical scenes. A doctor examines Burns and informs him that he has every disease known to medical science. Every single one. Simultaneously, the diagnosis is delivered with the deadpan resignation of a doctor who has seen many unusual things and is now experiencing something that transcends the unusual. Burns's body hosts every known disease, and those diseases exist in a state of perfect balance. Each one cancels out the others. Three Stooges syndrome, the doctor calls it, comparing it to the physical comedy scenario where three people try to go through a single doorway simultaneously and get stuck. Each disease is trying to advance. Each disease is being blocked by every other disease. None of them can progress because all of them are present at once, creating a biological gridlock that functions, paradoxically, as a kind of invulnerability. The diseases cannot kill him because they are all competing to kill him, and none of them can get through. This is the explanation the show offers, and it is played as absurdism. The idea that having every disease is somehow better than having a manageable few is a joke, and it is a good one. But follow the logic of the radiation treatments. Those treatments do not cure Burns's diseases. If they cured the diseases, Burns would not need them every week. The treatments maintain the equilibrium. They keep every illness at exactly the level required to hold all the other illnesses in check. The radiation therapy is not eliminating the diseases from Burns's body. It is managing them, calibrating them, adjusting the balance between competing biological failures the way a nuclear facility adjusts its control rods to maintain a safe operating temperature. Burns's body is a reactor. The diseases are the fuel. The treatments are the control system. Remove the control system and the reactor goes critical. Burns dies not because the diseases finally win, but because without the precise calibration of the treatments, the equilibrium collapses and everything kills him at once. Smithers is, in this reading, more than a devoted assistant. Smithers is the technician. Smithers manages Burns's schedule, which means Smithers manages the treatment schedule, which means Smithers is the person responsible for ensuring that Burns makes his weekly appointment and receives his weekly dose. If Smithers forgets or is prevented from arranging the treatment, or simply is not there one week, Burns dies. Smithers's devotion is not merely emotional, it is existential. He is the person standing between Burns and the collapse of the carefully maintained biological system that keeps him alive. His absence is a death sentence. The show has explored what happens when Smithers leaves in various episodes, and the answer is consistent. Burns becomes immediately helpless. Not emotionally helpless, though that too, but physically helpless in a way that goes beyond the obvious frailty of his body. He cannot manage his own affairs. He cannot navigate his own medical requirements. The infrastructure of his survival requires Smithers to operate it, and without Smithers operating it, the infrastructure begins to fail. The historical dimension of Burns adds another layer to the immortality question. Burns did not simply live a long time. Burns was present for things. He knew people who shaped the 20th century. He interacted with figures from American history in ways that placed him, repeatedly, at the intersection of power and consequence. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during World War II and kept it hidden for decades. He has referenced Howard Hughes with the familiarity of an acquaintance. His family wealth predates the Industrial Revolution, and the Burns dynasty, as several episodes sketch it, extends back centuries as a continuous thread of concentrated power. The question the show never answers, but keeps asking around the edges of, is whether Burns is unique or whether the Burns family has always known something about extending a lifespan beyond its natural limits. If the current Burns has maintained his hold on power for over a century through artificial means, what did his predecessors use before nuclear radiation was available as a medical tool? Before modern medicine, before the technology that currently keeps Burns alive, the Burns family was still accumulating power. The dynasty was still continuous. The wealth was still concentrated in the same bloodline generation after generation. Either Burns's predecessors were exceptionally long-lived through natural means, which strains credibility given what the show establishes about Burns's own condition, or they employed whatever methods were available to them in their time to ensure the continuity of the dynasty. The means change. The goal remains the same. Keep the Burns in power. Keep the Burns alive. Ensure that the empire does not dissolve into the ordinary human tragedy of succession and inheritance. Burns has died, or come close to dying, many times within the show. He has been shot. He has collapsed. He has been hospitalized. He has been abandoned in the wilderness with no resources. Each time, he comes back. And the mechanism of his return is always the same. Infrastructure. Money calls doctors who have the treatments. Smithers makes calls. Private facilities with private resources are mobilized. The machine that keeps Burns alive is activated because the machine was built for exactly this contingency. Homer survives things because the show needs him to survive. The rules of cartoon reality protect him from the consequences of damage that would kill a person in the actual world. Burns survives things because he has spent a century building a system whose entire purpose is to ensure his survival, regardless of what happens to his physical form. He is not protected by cartoon logic. He is protected by wealth, which in the world of Springfield is something more reliable than cartoon logic and considerably more deliberate. There is something almost admirable about it, in the way that something vast and cold and completely indifferent to human cost can be admirable as a feat of engineering. Burns looked at the problem of mortality, understood it as a systems problem rather than a biological inevitability, and built systems to address it. He understood that dying was, for him, primarily a resource allocation problem. If enough resources were directed at the prevention of his death, his death could be prevented indefinitely. The body might deteriorate, the diseases might accumulate, the weekly treatments might become more extreme as the years accumulated, but the system would hold. The system has held for over a century. The town's relationship to Burns's survival is the final piece of this argument, and it is the one the show seems most aware of without ever quite naming directly. Springfield depends on the plant. The plant depends on Burns. Burns depends on the treatments. The treatments depend on the wealth the plant generates. The whole system is circular, self-sustaining, each element feeding the others in a loop that has no clean exit point. If Burns dies, the empire collapses. If the empire collapses, the plant closes. If the plant closes, Springfield loses its primary employer and its electrical supply. The town does not survive in its current form without the plant, and the plant does not survive without Burns, and Burns does not survive without the treatments, and the treatments do not exist without the plant's revenue. Springfield cannot afford to let Burns die. The town's continued existence, as it is currently configured, requires that the man who has been poisoning it stay alive. This is the horror at the center of the economics. The victim requires the survival of the person responsible for the victimization. The population drinking the contaminated water needs the owner of the contaminating facility to keep breathing. If he stops breathing, they lose their lights. If they lose their lights, they lose everything else. Burns stays alive because Springfield needs him alive. And Springfield, needing him alive, has unconsciously organized itself around his survival in ways that look like loyalty or dependence, but are really just the ordinary human instinct to protect the source of one's electricity. There is one more scene worth sitting with before we move on. Burns is not afraid of death. He has been too close to it, too many times over, too many years, to maintain the fear of it that most people carry through their lives. He has made his arrangements. He has built his systems. He faces the end with the equanimity of someone who has been prepared for it for decades and has taken every available measure to delay it. But in certain quiet moments, in certain episodes where the usual armor of his cruelty is briefly lowered, there is something else there. A very old man who has outlived everyone he knew, who has watched the century he was born in become a century of history, who has maintained his empire through the efforts of men who eventually died and were replaced by new men who eventually died, while he continued. There is a loneliness in Burns that the show acknowledges without dwelling on, because dwelling on it would require the show to feel something about its primary villain, and complexity of that kind is uncomfortable to sit with. Burns is very old and very alone and very alive. In a building that glows faintly at the edge of Springfield at night. He will probably outlive us all. Section 6. Maggie, Simpson, and the silence that thinks. Let the room go quiet for a moment. There is a baby in Springfield who has been 1 year old for 36 years. She communicates primarily through the sound of a pacifier and the occasional pointed stare. She has not developed language in any meaningful sense. She cannot walk reliably without falling. She is, by every external measure, exactly what she appears to be. An infant in a onesie, present in the background of family scenes, passed between parents, occasionally used as a plot device. That is what the show wants you to think Maggie Simpson is. What Maggie Simpson actually is, assembled from the evidence the show has accumulated across its entire run, is something considerably more complex and considerably more patient. Begin with the shooting. The Who Shot Mr. Burns mystery will get its own full treatment in the next section, so let us not get too far into the details here. What matters for Maggie is not the question of who pulled the trigger. What matters is the final shot of the episode in which the answer is revealed. The room has emptied. Everyone who was present for the revelation has left. Maggie is alone. This is the moment the show chose to end on. After all the drama and all the investigation and all the false suspects and all the courtroom theater, Maggie alone in the room. And then Maggie, with careful deliberateness, moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics the action of pulling a trigger. She glances around the room first. She confirms that she is not being observed. And then she makes the gesture. What does that sequence of actions require? It requires situational awareness, the ability to read the social environment and determine whether other people are present and paying attention. It requires memory, the ability to recall what happened in that room and connect it to the physical sensation of having done it. It requires caution, the understanding that performing this gesture in front of others would have consequences. And it requires the impulse control to wait until the coast is clear before doing something that reveals what you know. These are not infant behaviors. An infant does not survey a room to determine whether it is being watched before making a gesture it has assessed as socially significant. An infant does not calculate consequence. An infant does not wait. Waiting requires a theory of mind, an understanding that other people have perceptions and reactions that can be managed through strategic behavior. Babies are developing theory of mind at around 18 months to 2 years. Maggie, who is nominally 1-year-old, demonstrates a fully formed theory of mind in that final shot, the ability to model what other people are seeing and adjust her own behavior accordingly. That is not a cartoon shortcut. That is a characterization choice. The show chose to show you Maggie alone in the room. The show chose to have her check whether she was being watched. The show chose to have her make the gesture only after confirming her privacy. The show is telling you something about who Maggie is. Let us go to The Longest Daycare. This is a short theatrical film released in 2012, running approximately 7 minutes, which was screened in cinemas before a major summer animated film. It received an Academy Award nomination, which tells you something about the critical judgment of people who watch this kind of thing professionally. 7 minutes of a baby navigating a daycare center with no dialogue from Maggie, and it earned a nomination for one of the most prestigious film awards in the world. The premise is deceptively simple. Maggie is dropped at a daycare facility. She encounters a caterpillar she wants to protect. A larger, stronger baby named Gerald wants to destroy it. What follows is an extended sequence of problem-solving so sophisticated that describing it in terms of infant behavior feels almost satirical. Maggie reads the environment. She identifies the threats, not just Gerald but the staff and the structural obstacles of the facility itself. She develops a plan with multiple contingencies. She executes the plan while adapting in real time to obstacles she did not anticipate. She coordinates her actions through timing and spatial awareness that most adults would struggle to maintain under equivalent pressure. She outmaneuvers everyone in the building using only her observation skills and her ability to predict how other people will behave when presented with particular situations, and she does all of this without speaking, without tools designed for adult hands. With the motor capabilities of a 1-year-old, which means she falls frequently and often has to crawl when she needs to run and uses her teeth when her fingers cannot manage a task. Her physical limitations are real and constant, and she works around every single one of them. There is a reading of The Longest Daycare that goes beyond appreciating it as a clever premise. In that reading, the short film is not a comedy about a baby who is unexpectedly competent. It is a portrait of an extraordinary mind trapped in a body that cannot fully express it. Maggie's intelligence has nowhere adequate to go. She cannot speak. She cannot write. She cannot do any of the things that intelligence typically manifests through in human experience. She is constrained to action, to physical problem solving, to the manipulation of environment rather than the manipulation of language or ideas. Her intelligence is real and it is enormous, and it has almost no outlet. The show has measured Maggie's intelligence directly in episodes that play the result as a quick joke and move on without acknowledging what they have just said. In multiple contexts, Maggie is tested or assessed, and the result is the same. Her intelligence is extraordinary, above measurable range, off the charts in a way that standardized testing does not have the vocabulary to adequately describe. The show plays this as a throwaway beat and then cuts to something else. But the pattern is there. Every time the show has given Maggie a formal measurement, the measurement has come back exceptional. Every time the show has put Maggie in a situation requiring intelligence, she has solved it. Every time the show has depicted Maggie operating independently, without adult supervision, she has demonstrated capabilities that adults in her immediate environment do not possess. Now look at Lisa. Lisa Simpson is the acknowledged genius of the family. Her intelligence is visible, audible, constantly expressed. She plays saxophone. She writes. She argues. She debates. She lectures. She challenges authority. She submits papers and wins academic competitions and fights for causes and announces, through every method available to her, that she is the smartest person in the room and that the room should take that seriously. And the room does not take it seriously. Lisa's intelligence in Springfield is a problem. It marks her as different. It isolates her from peers who are not interested in what she knows. It puts her in conflict with authority figures who are threatened by someone who can out-argue them. It draws the kind of attention that Springfield is not comfortable with. The kind of attention that insists on truth in a place that has made an art form of avoiding it. Lisa uses her intelligence visibly, loudly, in the open, and the cost is constant friction with a world that would prefer she be less. Maggie watched this. Maggie has been watching this since she was born. She watched her sister fight every day to be recognized by a household and a community that had decided, collectively and without discussion, that being smart was less important than being easy. She watched the most demonstrably capable mind in the family be consistently ignored, patronized, and worked around. She watched intelligence used as a weapon against its owner, the way Lisa's genius becomes evidence of her alienation rather than evidence of her value. And Maggie, who has a mind that dwarfs even Lisa's, drew a conclusion. The conclusion is one that a certain kind of very intelligent person in a certain kind of very hostile environment eventually draws. Do not show them what you have. Silence is not limitation in Maggie's case. Silence is the most deliberate choice available to her. By staying quiet, by performing infancy, by giving the people around her no evidence that she understands what is happening, she becomes invisible in the most useful way. Nobody worries about what Maggie knows. Nobody fears what Maggie might do. Nobody keeps a particularly close eye on the baby who is just sitting there with her pacifier, apparently passive, apparently dependent, apparently as simple as she appears. The baby who is doing all of this simultaneously, reading every person in the room, cataloging their behaviors, modeling their likely responses, planning the next 3 moves, waiting for the moment when action will be most effective. Think about every time Maggie saves a family member and consider who notices. Homer is in danger. Maggie acts. Homer is saved. Homer does not attribute his salvation to Maggie in any sustained way. He might notice briefly, but the credit does not accumulate. The family does not sit down after the incident and discuss the fact that the baby just executed a perfectly timed intervention that an adult would have struggled to manage. The save happens, the danger passes, and Maggie returns to being background presence. Nobody watches her more closely after. Nobody asks what she was thinking or how she knew. She acts. She succeeds. She is unobserved in her success. And she returns to appearing to be exactly what people expect her to be. This is a strategy. It is elegant, and it is effective, and it requires a level of social sophistication that most adults never develop. Most people, when they have a capability they are proud of, want to demonstrate that capability. The impulse to be recognized for what you can do is almost universal. Suppressing that impulse entirely, sustaining the performance of limitation over years, never slipping, never revealing, requires a discipline that is as impressive as the intelligence it conceals. Maggie never slips, 36 years, and the only moment she has come close to revealing herself is the trigger gesture in the empty room. And even that she waited until the room was empty to make. Connect this to the radiation theory. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces mutations, and if those mutations distribute differently across individual biology, then Homer and Maggie represent the extreme ends of the same distribution. Homer's exposure, combined with the crayon and whatever else has contributed to his cognitive state, reduced his intelligence to its lowest functional expression. Maggie's exposure produced the opposite effect. Some genetic interaction, some particular cellular response to the environmental contamination, amplified whatever baseline intelligence she was born with into something that standard measures cannot contain. Same water, same air, same yellow skin, different result. Burns maximized in one direction, Homer minimized in another, and Maggie in the middle of all of it, watching. The coma theory adds its own dimension here, and it is the most emotionally acute reading of Maggie that the show has produced without acknowledging it directly. If everything since April 1993 is Homer's dream, if the Springfield we watch every week is the projection of an unconscious mind trying to maintain contact with the family it has lost access to, then Maggie's extraordinary intelligence is Homer's deepest wish made literal. He cannot see her grow up. He cannot hear her first words, her real first words, the ones that come after daddy, the ones that come when a child has enough of a vocabulary to start explaining themselves to the world. He cannot watch her walk without falling. He cannot see what she becomes. He was there for the first year, and then the vending machine tipped over and he was somewhere else entirely, in a hospital room or nowhere at all, while Maggie continued without him. So the dreaming Homer makes her extraordinary. He gives her a mind that cannot be contained. He gives her competence that adults cannot match. He gives her the quiet, unacknowledged capability of someone who is going to be completely fine without him, who does not need him watching over her because she has already surpassed the need for that kind of protection. Maggie's genius, in this reading, is a father's prayer for a child he cannot protect. The dream gives her what Homer cannot. It makes her invulnerable in the way intelligence can make you invulnerable, by giving you the tools to navigate whatever comes without needing anyone to navigate it for you. The other reading, the one that does not require the coma theory but is available outside of it, is darker and simpler. Maggie is waiting. She has been waiting for 36 years. She has been accumulating observation, building her understanding of every person in this town, watching every dynamic and every failure and every instance of the kind of quiet suffering that Springfield distributes so evenly among its residents. She has been watching Homer fail at the same things for decades. She has been watching Lisa's intelligence go unrewarded for decades. She has been watching Burns operate his system on the people around her, degrading them slowly, keeping them compliant, ensuring that the fog never quite lifts enough for anyone to see clearly. And she has been saying nothing, which is not the same as doing nothing, and planning something which the show has never revealed, which is perhaps the only real mystery left in Springfield that has not been at least partially addressed. What is Maggie waiting to do? She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for a very long time. The pacifier has not come out. The second word has never come. The intelligence behind those enormous eyes has never been fully displayed for an audience that could understand what it was seeing. At some point, the waiting will end. Springfield will not see it coming. The family will not see it coming. No one who has been treating Maggie as background will see it coming. That is exactly how she designed it. Section 7. Who shot Mr. Burns? The summer of 1995 belonged to a mystery. The Simpsons had done something that no animated show had ever attempted. It had constructed a genuine whodunit, a real mystery with real suspects and real evidence, and it had asked the American public to solve it. The show did not just air a cliffhanger episode. It built a cultural event around the cliffhanger. Fox promoted the mystery as though it were a real unsolved crime. America's Most Wanted, a television program dedicated to actual fugitives and actual victims, produced a tie-in special treating the fictional shooting of a fictional billionaire as though it were a matter of genuine public safety. Springfield's Most Wanted, they called it. The crime was pretend, the engagement was real, and the mystery was this. Mr. Burns had done something unforgivable. He had done many unforgivable things across his long career, but this collection, in this sequence, at this moment, had finally exhausted even Springfield's remarkable capacity for endurance. Burns had discovered oil beneath Springfield Elementary School. Rather than share the revenue with the school, he had drilled through the school's foundation to access the oil, gutting the building's structural integrity and diverting funds that had been promised to the school's programs. The music budget was gone. The art supplies were gone. The one slice of cultural enrichment that Springfield's children had access to was gone because a billionaire discovered he could make more money by taking it. He had then used his new oil revenue to construct an enormous device, a dish of considerable engineering achievement, that he positioned above Springfield for the explicit purpose of blocking the sun. Burns wanted to force every resident of Springfield to purchase their electricity from his power plant, because if the sun was blocked, solar energy became unavailable, natural light became unavailable, and the only reliable source of power in the entire town would be the nuclear facility Burns owned. He had, quite literally, stolen the sun from the people of Springfield. When his loyal assistant Smithers protested this, Burns fired him on the spot. By the end of the episode, every significant character in Springfield had a motive to want Burns dead. Homer, who had worked for Burns for years without Burns ever learning his name, had finally broken. Bart and Lisa, whose school had been gutted. Grandpa Simpson, whose retirement home had been destroyed by a sinkhole Burns had caused. Groundskeeper Willie, who had lost his job. Tito Puente, whose music program was eliminated. Mo, whose bar Burns had driven into bankruptcy. Even Smithers, freshly fired and spiraling into the particular despair of someone whose entire identity was organized around the person who just discarded them. And then Burns was shot. He staggered out of the town meeting, collapsed onto the town sundial, and his hands fell across two letters, W and S. From Burns's own perspective, lying on his back on the sundial, those letters would read M and S, Maggie Simpson. Burns was taken to the hospital. Summer began. America waited. When the answer arrived in September, the official story assembled itself from the following pieces. The DNA evidence. An eyelash found on Burns's suit that matched the Simpson family. The sundial. Burns's hands indicating M and S. Burns's own testimony upon waking from his coma. He stated that he had encountered Maggie in the parking lot, reached for her lollipop, dropped his gun in the resulting struggle, and Maggie picked it up and fired it accidentally. Case closed? Baby did it? Now let us sit with the problems. The contest first. Fox invited viewers to submit their guesses for who shot Burns, with the prize being animation into a future episode. Thousands of entries were submitted. According to the DVD commentary for these episodes, from the people who actually made the show, not a single person in the randomly selected review sample guessed the correct answer. Nobody won. The person who was given the prize was chosen at random from the pool and, since they did not have the right answer, was given a cash payment instead of the promised animation. The writers note on the same commentary that one person did post the correct answer to a Simpsons news group on the night the first episode aired. One person. They had a college internet account. By the time the contest ended and the producers tried to find them, the account was gone. The single person who got it right had disappeared into the early internet. Think about what this means. The show's creators told the public that the mystery was solvable from the clues in Part 1. They designed a national contest around solvability. They promoted it as a puzzle the audience could crack. And when the answer was revealed, essentially no one had solved it. Out of thousands of entries, from a population that had been watching carefully and thinking hard, one person won. Either the clues were insufficient to support the answer, or the answer was changed after the clues were laid, or the answer does not logically follow from the evidence in the way the show claimed it did. The show's creators have confirmed, in various interviews and commentaries, that the answer was not fixed when the first episode was written. Multiple shooter candidates were seriously considered during production. Barney Gumble was written as the shooter in at least one draft, with a plan to send him to prison as a way of doing something new with a character who had stalled. A complete alternate ending was animated in which Smithers is revealed as the shooter. Not a brief sketch, not a proof of concept. A full voiced, produced alternate conclusion showing Smithers as the guilty party. The Smithers ending was shown during the 138th episode Spectacular, hosted by the fictional Troy McClure, who dismisses it by explaining that it would not have worked, because all the Simpson DNA evidence would have to be ignored, which would be, he says, downright nutty. That line is not random. The writing staff, working on a different episode months later, chose to dismiss the Smithers alternate ending by invoking DNA evidence and the concept of a jury ignoring it. The O.J. Simpson trial had occurred in 1995, the same year as the Burns shooting episodes. The O.J. Simpson trial was, among other things, a nationally televised debate about whether a jury would ignore DNA evidence to reach a verdict it preferred. The show was aware of this parallel. It embedded a reference to it in the dismissal of its own alternate ending. The show is winking. It is telling you that dismissing evidence to reach a preferred verdict is something that happens. It is telling you that the official answer is not necessarily the true answer. It is wrapping that observation in a comedy reference so that it lands as a joke and not as an admission. The sundial evidence. Burns fell on the sundial. His hands landed on W and S, which read as M and S from his perspective. Burns himself, upon waking and being asked about the sundial, stated explicitly that he did not intentionally position his hands. He fell. Where his hands landed was the result of physics and gravity, not deliberate communication. The central piece of evidence that the show uses to point toward Maggie Simpson was described as a coincidence by the person it supposedly implicates. The victim says the clue is meaningless. The show uses the clue as the cornerstone of its conclusion. The gun. Burns carried a gun in a holster. Before the shooting occurs, the holster is shown empty. The gun was already missing from Burns's person at some point before he was shot. Whoever shot Burns used Burns' own weapon, a weapon that had been separated from him by someone prior to the attack. This means the shooter was not someone who came to the town meeting armed and planning to shoot. It means the shooter encountered the gun by chance or opportunity and used it impulsively. A baby picking up a gun that fell on the ground fits this profile. So does almost any other person present that night who was not carrying a weapon. The gun clue narrows the field somewhat, but does not conclusively identify Maggie. Burns' final words before being shot. "Oh, it's you." 3 words. Calm. And recognizing. Not alarmed, not afraid. The voice of someone who has encountered a familiar face, someone they were not expecting to see but whose presence is not threatening. Does Burns know Maggie? Is there an established relationship between the richest man in Springfield and the Simpson infant? The show does not establish one prior to this episode. Burns barely knows Homer, and Homer has worked for him for years. The idea that Burns would recognize a baby and greet her with the familiarity of an acquaintance, with the particular phrasing of someone acknowledging a specific individual rather than expressing surprise at an unexpected presence, does not sit comfortably with what we know of Burns' habits. The Marge theory is worth examining here. It was developed by a fan, arguing the case in considerable detail, and it is surprisingly coherent. Marge had every reason to want Burns dealt with. Burns had gutted her children's school. Burns had stolen the sun from her family's daily life. Burns had, through the accumulated weight of his actions across the first 6 seasons of the show, been responsible for a significant portion of the damage done to the people Marge loves. Burns had also, in a previous season, become infatuated with Marge. He had pursued her. He had shown the particular attention to her that a very powerful and very lonely man shows when he has decided someone is worth wanting. That infatuation was not reciprocated, but it was real within the show's continuity. If Marge shot Burns, Burns would know her. Oh, you makes complete sense if the person holding the gun is Marge Simpson. It is the greeting of a man who recognizes the woman he was once infatuated with and is surprised, perhaps, to find her in this particular context, but not surprised to see her face. And if Burns recognized Marge, he would not have named her. The infatuation would have its last expression in protection. He took the bullet, woke up, and when asked to identify the shooter, he looked for something that would close the investigation without destroying the woman who had done it. The sundial was there, the letters M and S were there. There was a Simpson baby in the vicinity. Burns, who has spent a century being very clever about very difficult situations, pointed at the sundial and let the town draw its own conclusions. Maggie became the answer because Maggie was convenient. An infant cannot be prosecuted. The chief of police says this explicitly. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maggie was the perfect resolution to the case. It closes the file without requiring anyone to be punished, without requiring anyone to examine the political implications of prosecuting whoever the shooter might actually be, and without requiring the investigation to go anywhere that might be uncomfortable for the people running Springfield. And in season 18, Homer claims to be the shooter. He says it out loud, on camera, to other characters. Nobody reopens the case. Nobody investigates. Nobody treats it as the confession of a man who has just admitted to the attempted murder of the richest individual in Springfield. It is treated as a throwaway comment. Either Homer is being Homer, saying things for attention, or out of impulse without regard for accuracy, which is entirely consistent with his character, or Homer is telling the truth. And the official verdict was wrong, and his daughter has been carrying the responsibility for something her father did for 23 years of the show's run. There is one more detail that the show included, and that has sat quietly in the narrative for almost 3 decades without receiving the attention it warrants. After the verdict is delivered and Burns is identified and the case is officially closed, the show cuts to Maggie alone. She is in the room where the resolution happened. Everyone else has left, and she moves her pacifier to mime pulling a trigger. The show wants you to read that as confirmation. Guilty. She did it. She knows she did it. The gesture is a confession. There is another reading. Maggie is 1 year old. Or she performs being 1 year old. She is in a room where something happened. A man was shot in this room, or near it, and she was present, and she watched. And now, alone in the room, she is processing what she saw. She is replaying the image of someone pulling a trigger. She is doing what small children do when they have witnessed something significant and have no other way to engage with the memory of it. She is not confessing. She is remembering. What Maggie saw and who she saw do it remains the show's deepest unresolved question, because the show resolved it officially, and the official resolution never quite settled. The mystery was closed. The case was not solved. In Springfield, the distinction between those two things is something everyone has learned not to mention. Section 8. Mona Simpson and the Conspiracy Behind Homer. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the established fact. Not debated, not questioned, not unresolved. Dead. Abe Simpson had told Homer she had passed away when Homer was young. There was a grave. Homer had mourned. He had grown up understanding himself as a boy whose mother left him in the most final way a mother can leave, and whose father, present but somehow always at a distance, had never quite been enough to fill the space she left behind. Homer's emotional architecture, the particular shape of his neediness and his fear of abandonment, and his desperate hunger to be liked by everyone he encounters, was built on that foundation. He clings to Marge with the specific intensity of someone who has been taught by experience that the people you love can disappear without warning. He endures humiliation and mistreatment from Burns because losing his job, losing the one thing he has that resembles stability, would send him somewhere close to the kind of alone he was as a child. Homer overeats, overdrinks, overcommits to impulse and gratification and the immediate moment, in the way that people do when they have learned that the future is not a place that can be trusted. He is, in some fundamental way, still the child who woke up one morning and his mother was gone. In Season 7, the show revealed that the loss was a lie. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired in November of 1995, and it remains one of the most purely effective pieces of storytelling the show has ever produced. Homer discovers, through a bureaucratic accident involving a faked death certificate and a trip to the Hall of Records, that his mother is listed as alive in Springfield's municipal records. The grave Abe showed him belonged to Walt Whitman, the poet. For Homer's entire life, his father had been using a famous writer's headstone as a substitute for a wife who was not dead but simply elsewhere. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave. She does not recognize him at first. He is older than the child she left. He is the adult version of a person she knew only as a small boy, and the distance between small boys and middle-aged men is enormous, especially when that distance has been crossed entirely without you. But Homer proves who he is, and they have a reunion that the show handles with a restraint unusual for its comedy format. 2 people standing beside a grave that belongs to neither of them, finding each other in the space of 30 years of absence. And then Mona tells Homer why she left. The story goes back to 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife in Springfield. She was married to Abe. She had a young son named Homer who was, at the time, around 6 years old. She was ordinary. She was unremarkable. She was living a quiet life in a town that was in the process of becoming the town the show depicts, with its nuclear plant and its complicated relationship to the man who owned it. And then something changed. The world outside Springfield was burning with everything that 1969 contained: civil rights and Vietnam and the counterculture, and the particular energy of a generation that had decided the existing structures of power needed to be challenged. Mona, through some sequence of events the show depicts as gradual but irreversible, was radicalized. She joined a group of activists. She committed herself to a cause. The cause was this: Burns owned a biological weapons laboratory, not a nuclear facility, a germ warfare facility, a laboratory specifically designed to produce weapons-grade pathogens in the same town where Homer was growing up, where Mona's own child was breathing the air and drinking the water and playing outside without any awareness of what was being manufactured down the road. Burns was not merely operating a dangerous nuclear facility in Springfield. He was operating a facility designed to produce diseases intended to kill people, and he was operating it inside the residential boundaries of a community that had no idea it was there. Mona and her group broke into the laboratory. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological agent stored inside. They successfully eliminated the weapons program Burns was running in their neighborhood. They did something genuinely important, genuinely good, at real personal risk. And then Mona made a mistake. As the group fled, She stopped to help someone who had been knocked down in the chaos. That someone was Burns. She stopped instinctively because she was the kind of person who stopped for someone who needed help, even in the middle of a raid she had just conducted on his weapons facility. She stopped and she helped him, and Burns looked up and saw her face. He called the FBI. He gave them her description. From that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not hold her son. She could not explain to the small boy who would wake up and find her gone why she was leaving, or where she was going, or whether she would ever be back. She kissed Homer while he was sleeping and disappeared. For 27 years. Homer woke up and his mother was gone, and his father told him she was dead, and Homer spent the next 3 decades of his life constructing an understanding of himself as someone whose mother had chosen, at the deepest level of her existence, to leave. Because that is what death is when you are a small child and your understanding of metaphysics is incomplete. Death is a choice. It is the most final leaving, and the child who has been left by it carries a question that never quite goes away. Was I enough to make her stay? Homer was not enough. His mother left anyway. That is the story Homer lived with. That is the story Abe constructed for him, presumably to protect him from a truth that was more complicated and more dangerous than a child could manage. The truth was that his mother loved him entirely and left because staying would have put him at risk. She left to protect him. She left because Burns, the man who would one day sign Homer's paychecks, had made staying impossible. When Mona comes back to Springfield in season 7, Burns sees her from a passing vehicle. He recognizes her immediately. He makes a call. The FBI arrives at the Simpson house. Mona has to leave again, and this time Homer is there to watch her go. He knows why. He understands now what his childhood was built on. He has the adult vocabulary for the grief that the child did not. And then Homer goes back to work at the power plant. He goes back to work for the man who destroyed his family. He takes his paycheck from the man who forced his mother underground for 3 decades. He continues to spend his working life inside the building that Burns owns, in service of the empire that Burns has built, in the place where all of Burns's power in Springfield is concentrated and exercised. Homer does not connect the dots, not in any sustained, action-generating way. He experiences the connection in the episode where it is revealed. He feels it. And then life continues, and Burns continues to not know his name, and Homer continues to go to work, and the arc of the revenge or the reckoning or the confrontation that should follow from what Homer now knows never arrives. This is the tragedy that runs underneath the comedy of Homer's life, like a river under ice. He has the information, he has the motive. He has the reason to walk out of Sector 7G and never return, to confront Burns, to do something with the knowledge that the man who cannot remember his name is the man who made his childhood into something broken and dark and fundamentally insufficient. But Homer cannot hold the knowledge in the way required to act on it. His cognitive architecture, compromised by crayon and radiation and decades of accumulated neurological damage, does not provide the sustained processing that connects cause to consequence to action. He knows Burns destroyed his family. He will forget, in the way Springfield forgets, in the way his own mind forgets, and next episode he will be back at his workstation, falling asleep over his console, waiting for someone to bring donuts. Burns, for his part, is fully aware of what he did. He pursued Mona for decades. He recognized her in a moving vehicle from across a street after 27 years. He picked up a phone and undid her homecoming within hours of her arrival. His memory for the particular woman who destroyed his biological weapons program is precise and operational in a way his memory for his own employees is not. The show has also established that Burns struck a deal with Grandpa Simpson. In a later season, it is revealed that Grandpa witnessed something, some crime or transgression by Burns, and rather than expose it, he negotiated. In exchange for Grandpa's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer's employment. Homer would have a job at the plant, unconditionally, regardless of performance, regardless of the documented failures that numbered in the hundreds, because the deal required it. Homer's job security is not a cartoon convenience, it is a contract. Burns does not keep Homer because Homer is useful. Burns keeps Homer because Burns made a deal with Homer's father to keep Homer, a deal made in the shadow of the larger deal Burns made when he drove Homer's mother out of town. The Simpson family is bound to Burns through Abe's silence and Mona's absence, and the employment contract that keeps Homer at the console, and keeps the violations unaddressed, and keeps the radiation flowing. 3 generations of Simpsons, managed by one man's grudge. Mona Simpson returned one final time in a later season, and she died. The show handled her death with the same quiet seriousness it brought to Mother Simpson. Homer sat with her. He held her hand. He watched her go for the last time, and the weight in the scene was the weight of everything. The years she was absent, the years they found each other too briefly, the years that were lost between the night she kissed him while he was sleeping and the morning she was gone. The show is a comedy. It has always been a comedy. Under the jokes, under the gags, under 36 seasons of Homer falling down and getting back up, there is a story about a family that was taken apart by one man's decision to protect his weapons program from a woman who believed it should not exist. She was right. The weapons should not have existed. Burns should not have been manufacturing pathogens in a residential neighborhood. Mona should not have had to become a fugitive for believing that. Burns won anyway. He always wins in Springfield. Because in Springfield, the man with the resources to pursue a grudge for 30 years will always outlast the person who simply wanted to do the right thing. Homer is still at the power plant. The plant is still leaking. The deal Abe made is still honored. And somewhere in the genealogy of all the compromises that produce the Springfield of today, there is a woman who kissed her sleeping son and left to protect him, and whose protection lasted a lifetime but never quite reached him in the way she intended. That is the story behind Homer's story. The one the show told in fragments across many seasons, trusting that the audience would hold the pieces together even when the characters could not. Section 9. The Predictions and the Mirror. There is a particular way that The Simpsons predictions circulate on the internet. Someone finds a clip, someone takes a screenshot. The clip gets shared with a caption that reads something like, "They knew," or "How did they know?" or "Explain this." The image spreads, the shares accumulate, and a show that debuted before most of its current audience was born briefly becomes the most talked about piece of media in the culture for a news cycle or two until the next clip surfaces and the cycle begins again. The list is real. The show predicted a Trump presidency 16 years before it happened. The show depicted a device that resembles a modern smartwatch in 1995. The show depicted the Disney acquisition of 20th Century Fox in 1998, 21 years before it happened. The show included a mathematical equation in a 1998 episode that appears to predict the mass of the Higgs boson particle, a figure that would not be experimentally confirmed until 2012. The show depicted a flu pandemic spreading from Asia in 1993, 27 years before COVID-19. During that same fictional outbreak, the town accidentally released a swarm of stinging insects that were dubbed in the episode with a name close to the name that would be applied to Asian giant hornets when they appeared in the United States during the actual 2020 pandemic. In 1996, the show included a joke in which the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally booked the London Symphony Orchestra. In 2024, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. 28 years between the joke and the event. There are more. The show depicted video calling before it was common. The show depicted surveillance technology before it was ubiquitous. The show depicted the particular cultural logic of celebrity politics in ways that anticipated the specific form that celebrity politics would take in the following 2 decades. The show depicted media consolidation as an accelerating trend. At a time when the individual mergers it was satirizing seemed large but not. From the vantage of 2025, particularly surprising. The official explanation from the people who make the show is straightforward. Executive producer Al Jean, producer Bill Oakley, and various writers who have addressed the question all give variations of the same answer. The show produces an enormous volume of satirical content, nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains many jokes, many cultural references, many observations about where America appears to be heading. When you produce that much material over that long a span, some of it will align with future events through statistical probability. The writers are highly educated people, many with backgrounds in mathematics, science, political science, and related fields from elite universities. They are not guessing. They are observing trends carefully and following them to their logical conclusions. Some of those conclusions turn out to be correct. This explanation is good. It is probably substantially true for most of the predictions. The show did not predict that Trump would become president by accessing some vision of the future. The show observed that Trump had been publicly flirting with presidential ambitions since the late 1980s, that celebrity culture and political culture were converging in ways that made a celebrity president increasingly plausible, and wrote a joke that extended that trajectory to its logical comic conclusion. When the conclusion arrived, it felt like prophecy, because the joke had been living in the culture for 16 years, forming part of everyone's mental landscape of what a Trump presidency would look like before it happened. The show did not predict the Disney-Fox merger through foresight. It observed that media consolidation was accelerating, that large entertainment companies were absorbing smaller ones, that the logic of late capitalism favored concentration of media ownership in fewer and fewer hands, and wrote a joke about what that logic would eventually produce. The joke was correct not because the writers knew what would happen, but because they understood more clearly than most observers what was already happening and where it was going. The smartwatch prediction is explainable as trend extrapolation. The 1990s were a period of rapid miniaturization in computing and communications technology. The trajectory was visible. A wristwatch that could do what computers do was a reasonable extrapolation of where the technology was going, not a supernatural vision of a specific future product. The Higgs boson equation is the most genuinely interesting case, and the show's writers have acknowledged that the person who put that equation in the background of that scene, Simon Singh, a mathematician who wrote for the show, included it as an in-joke for mathematically literate viewers rather than as a prediction of anything. The fact that the equation relates to the eventual confirmed mass of the particle is a mathematical coincidence rather than a forecast, though the coincidence is the kind that makes people stop and stare. Confirmation bias does a great deal of the remaining work. The show has produced thousands of satirical observations that did not come true. Predictions about technology that never developed, political outcomes that went in different directions, cultural shifts that bent the other way. Nobody shares those. Nobody builds a conspiracy theory around the episode where the show got it wrong. The algorithm of human memory and internet sharing filters for the hits and discards the misses, producing a highlight reel that, when viewed without the misses included, looks like an impossible record of accurate foresight. If you remember only the predictions that were correct, you are not remembering the predictions. You are remembering a curated selection of coincidences. But here is where the straightforward debunking runs into something it cannot quite explain away. Some of the coincidences are too specific. The Trump prediction does not just forecast that a celebrity might become president. It shows Trump specifically descending an escalator, and Trump's actual 2015 campaign announcement featured him descending an escalator as a central visual element. The show did not just predict the type. It seems to have depicted the specific image. The Siegfried and Roy episode depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers, and in 2003, Roy Horn was critically injured by one of the act's white tigers. The show did not just predict that exotic animal performers might be in danger. It depicted the specific configuration, the specific animal, the specific event. These are not trend extrapolations. These are specific images that correspond to specific future events in ways that cannot be fully explained by saying the writers understood the cultural trajectory. And here is the more interesting theory, the one that sits under the debunking and under the conspiracy thinking alike, the one that neither side of the prediction argument quite names. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes it. The show has been running since 1989. It is one of the most watched, most referenced, most culturally embedded pieces of media in the history of American television. Its jokes have become part of the shared vocabulary of a culture. Its observations have become part of how millions of people understand the world they live in. When you spend a decade or two watching a show that frames American culture in a particular way, that framing starts to feel like reality, and reality starts to feel like it is confirming the framing. When The Simpsons made the Trump presidency a joke in 2000, it did not merely describe something that was going to happen. It made the idea familiar. It put the image of Trump in the Oval Office into the cultural imagination, where it sat for 16 years, shaping how people thought about the possibility, making the impossible feel more possible, making the future feel like something that had already been named. When Trump actually ran, when Trump actually won, the experience of watching it happen was inflected by the memory of having seen it framed as satire. The show did not predict the presidency. The show helped normalize the concept of it. The Disney-Fox merger did not happen because The Simpsons predicted it, but the show's long history of depicting media consolidation as an inevitable process, something to be expected and mocked rather than surprised by, contributed to a cultural atmosphere in which large corporate mergers were received with the resigned recognition of something already known rather than the shock of something new. Springfield does not reflect America. America has become Springfield, in the specific sense that the show has been part of the cultural architecture of American self-understanding for so long that its satirical framings have seeped into the actual structure of how the culture understands itself. We have stared at the mirror long enough that we started to resemble what we saw. And there is a corollary to this that the prediction discourse never quite reaches. The show has also shaped the things it predicted by making them feel inevitable. Political possibilities that seem like absurdist jokes eventually stop feeling like jokes and start feeling like reasonable outcomes. Technology that is depicted as futuristic gradually becomes design inspiration. The joke about the smartwatch was on screens and in the minds of engineers and designers for years before Apple made one. The culture that produced the smartwatch had been living with the idea of a wristwatch computer, normalized by its appearance as a background gag, for a long time before the product arrived. The predictions are real. The mechanism is not prophecy. The mechanism is cultural influence operating at such scale and over such a long period that the show has become a participant in the future it appears to be describing. There is a last observation worth making, one that the prediction discourse tends to skip over because it complicates the narrative of The Simpsons as Oracle. The show's predictions are almost all about decline, about the tendency of large systems to produce absurd or destructive outcomes, about the concentration of power in fewer hands, about the way celebrity and politics converge, the way corporations eat each other, the way technology that was supposed to liberate people becomes instead a new form of constraint. The show predicted Trump not because the writers had access to information about a specific future, but because the writers understood the logic of an America that rewards spectacle over substance, and they followed that logic until it terminated in its most comic, most grotesque conclusion. The show was right because the thing it was satirizing, the system it was pointing at and laughing at, kept going in the direction it was already going. The predictions are predictions in the same sense that a doctor's prognosis is a prediction. You are not seeing the future. You are reading the present carefully enough to understand where it leads. Springfield is a diagnosis, not a prophecy. Every prediction the show has ever made is the show pointing at something that was already happening and following the line forward. We shared the screenshots because it felt like magic. It is something more interesting than magic. It is a group of very careful observers writing down what they saw and being correct about where it was going. Section 10. The Principal and the Pauper Springfield's Social Contract. There is an episode of The Simpsons so despised by its fan base that it has become a kind of shorthand for artistic betrayal. It is cited in lists of the worst episodes ever made. It is invoked as evidence of the moment the show lost its way. People who love the show deeply often treat it with the particular hostility reserved for things that disappointed them in a place they did not expect to be disappointed. The episode is called The Principal and the Pauper. It aired in September of 1997, the second episode of the show's 9th season. It has been controversial since the night it first broadcast, and the controversy has not faded. 28 years later, the episode still generates argument, still generates anger, and the anger is understandable. The anger comes from a real place. But the anger is also, possibly, a response to the show doing something the fan base did not want it to do, telling the truth about Springfield in a way that was direct and unambiguous and impossible to dismiss. Here is what happens in the episode. Springfield Elementary holds a ceremony honoring Principal Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. During the celebration, a stranger arrives, a man no one recognizes. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war, was believed dead, survived, escaped, and has now returned home to Springfield. He is the real Seymour Skinner. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner for 20 years is revealed to be an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before the war, Tamzarian was a petty criminal, a street kid with no direction and no prospects. He was drafted into the military, served in the same unit as the real Skinner, and when Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian felt the weight of survivor's guilt. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news of Skinner's death to his mother, Agnes. When he arrived, Agnes mistook him for her son. She needed him to be her son. She was a woman who had organized her entire emotional life around a version of maternal authority that required a specific son to exercise it upon. Tamzarian, who had never been needed by anyone, who had never had a family or an identity worth inhabiting, accepted the mistake. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name. He took the rank. He took the life, the mother, the career, the 20 years of identity that accumulated on top of the borrowed foundation. He became, through sustained performance, the man Springfield needed him to be. And then the real Skinner walked through the door. The truth was fully exposed. Everyone in Springfield knew. The principal who had been running their school was a fraud. The man who had been cashing paychecks as Seymour Skinner was someone else entirely. The person whose relationship with Agnes Skinner had shaped an entire household was a stranger who had borrowed a dead man's name and lived inside it so long it no longer felt like borrowing. Springfield held a town meeting. The real Seymour Skinner was present. Armin Tamzarian was present. The truth was available, documented, verified, standing in the room and identifying itself. And the town voted to keep the lie. Not accidentally, not through confusion or poor information. Deliberately, with full knowledge of the facts, Judge Snyder issued a legal decree. The imposter was declared the real Skinner. The real Skinner, the actual man whose name and life had been occupied for 2 decades, was tied to a railroad car and physically removed from Springfield. The decree made it explicitly illegal, under penalty of torture, to ever mention the truth again. This is where the fan outrage comes from. The episode took a character the audience had known for 8 years and retroactively made everything about him a fiction. His military service was not his mother was not his relationship with Bart, which had been one of the show's most productive ongoing dynamics, was built on a lie that had been true only as a performance. The entire foundation of the character was pulled out and replaced with something that made no sense given what the audience thought they knew. The critics are right that the episode did this. They are right that it damaged the character. They are not wrong about any of that. What they are wrong about is interpreting this as a mistake. The episode is not a failure of craft. The episode is the most honest thing Springfield has ever said about itself. It just said it in a way that the audience found uncomfortable, which is perhaps the most Springfield thing about the episode. Springfield has always done this. The vote to keep Tamzarian over the real Skinner is not an aberration. It is the explicit, formalized, on-screen version of something the town does in every single episode, in the background, without ceremony, so smoothly and so completely that the audience barely notices. Springfield forgets its disasters. The town that was sealed under a glass dome by the federal government has no memory of the dome in subsequent episodes. The town that survived a hurricane, a sinkhole destroying the retirement home, a monorail that collapsed on its opening day, a nuclear near-miss, an alien encounter, and the literal blocking of the sun, resets to its baseline state by the following week. Every catastrophe is absorbed and expelled. Every consequence is erased. The town wakes up fresh, and nobody in it mentions what happened, and nobody in it seems to find the absence of memory strange. The Principal and the Pauper is the only episode that shows you the mechanism. It is the one time the show let you watch the vote happen in real time. It pulled back the curtain on the process that every other episode executes off-screen. It said, "You want to know how Springfield forgets? This is how. They hold a meeting. They weigh the cost of remembering against the cost of forgetting. They determine that the truth is more expensive than the lie. And then they vote. And the vote is unanimous." This is not played as a dark revelation within the episode. It is played as comedy. Judge Snyder issues his decree. The real Skinner is put on a train. Tamzarian resumes his life as the principal. The audience is supposed to find this absurd, and it is absurd, and the absurdity is the point. The absurdity is the exaggeration of something real made large enough to be funny. Small towns have always done this. Communities of all sizes have always done this. The capacity for collective denial, for the organized forgetting of inconvenient truths, for the consensus that protects the comfortable version of reality against the threatening version, is a human characteristic at every scale. Scandals get buried. Crimes get forgotten. The version of events that the people in power prefer becomes, over time, the version that everyone remembers. Because the people who remember the other version get tired, or move away, or die, or simply run out of energy for a fight that the community has decided not to have. The real Seymour Skinner is tied to a train and expelled. The last honest man in a town that has made honesty expensive is removed from the community, and the decree is issued that speaking the truth is punishable. Now, think about what this reveals about every other Springfield reset. Every time the dome is forgotten, there was no formal vote, no judge, no decree. But the same process happened. The community collectively determined that acknowledging the dome, following its implications to their conclusions, confronting the federal government's decision that Springfield was too toxic to leave unconstrained, was too costly. The cost would be examining the power plant. Examining the power plant would mean examining Burns. Examining Burns would mean challenging the man who employs a significant portion of the town. Challenging the employer means threatening the economy. Threatening the economy means threatening the lives of everyone who depends on it. So the dome is forgotten, not because people have no memory, because remembering is dangerous and forgetting is free. Springfield does not forget because its residents are stupid. Springfield forgets because remembering too much leads to conclusions that Springfield cannot afford to reach. The forgetting is protective. It is rational, in the specific, narrow sense that it protects the immediate survival of the community at the expense of its long-term health. The same calculus that a person makes when they do not address a medical symptom, because addressing it might produce a diagnosis they cannot afford to manage. Ignore it, and it might go away. Face it, and everything changes. Armin Tamzarian and the real Seymour Skinner are the embodiment of that calculus. Tamzarian is the comfortable lie that has organized itself into a functional presence. The real Skinner is the truth that arrived after the lie had become load-bearing, after too many things had been built on top of the false foundation to remove it without structural collapse. The community chose Tamzarian because removing Tamzarian would have required examining how and why the lie persisted, which would have required examining the systems that allowed it to persist, which would have led somewhere everyone had decided not to go. Harry Shearer, who voices both Skinner and Burns and several other major characters, publicly criticized the episode. His objection was that the episode destroyed Skinner's character by making everything about him fictional. His objection is the audience's objection, articulated by someone with a particular stake in the character's integrity. The objection is also, inadvertently, the episode's thesis. Skinner was fictional before the episode. Tamzarian's Skinner, the Skinner who had been running Springfield Elementary for 20 years, was already a construction. The episode did not make Skinner fictional. It acknowledged that he always was. That is the most uncomfortable thing about the principal and the pauper. It does not introduce dishonesty into Springfield. It reveals dishonesty that was already structural. And the audience, which had invested in the fiction of Skinner for 8 years, responded to that revelation with the same instinct that Springfield responded with when the real Skinner arrived. They wanted the imposter back. They found the truth too expensive. They wanted to vote, just like Springfield. Many of them did, in a sense. They wrote reviews, they made lists. They called the episode the worst in the series. They tried, through the accumulated force of audience opinion, to expel the real Skinner from the canon the way Springfield expelled him from the town. Springfield is not a cartoon. Springfield is the audience. Springfield's rules are our rules, and the episode that shows you those rules is the episode we remember as a betrayal. Section 11. Ned Flanders, Hans Molleman, and the town's hidden sadness. Every town has its version of the man who always seems fine. Springfield has Ned Flanders, who is better than fine. Ned is the aspirational resident, the moral exemplar, the person who does every conceivable thing correctly, and who greets each day with a warmth and a goodwill that never appears to tire or diminish. He is physically fit, he is financially responsible. He is kind to his neighbors, including the neighbor who makes his life genuinely harder. He is a good father and a good friend, and a person of genuine religious conviction who does not weaponize that conviction or use it to justify unkindness. He is in every measurable way a better person than Homer Simpson. This is not a close evaluation. By almost any standard that human societies use to judge their members, Ned wins and Homer loses, and the gap between them is not narrow. And the show punishes Ned for it, not through dramatic cruelty, not through a single devastating blow, through the particular cumulative weight of many losses, each one absorbed, each one processed through the mechanism of faith and forgiveness that Ned employs to manage whatever it is that lives underneath his relentless positivity. His wife, Maude, died. The circumstances are worth sitting with. Homer was at a NASCAR event. A promotional team was firing T-shirts into the crowd. Homer, characteristically, dove out of the way of an incoming T-shirt rather than absorbing it. The shirts that Homer dodged hit Maude. The impact knocked her off the bleachers. She died. Homer's specific, characteristic, entirely predictable act of self-preservation, the reflexive ducking that everyone who has watched Homer for more than an episode could have predicted he would perform, directly caused the death of his neighbor's wife. Homer's selfishness, expressed in the most ordinary of its many daily forms, produced the most catastrophic possible consequence for the person standing nearby. Ned forgave him. This is what Ned does. He forgave Homer for his role in Maude's death, with the thoroughness and the apparent completeness of a man who has processed the loss and arrived at an understanding of it that does not require assigning blame to the people around him. Or does he? Because what the show revealed about Ned in one of its most structurally important episodes is that Ned's forgiveness is not a freely chosen spiritual practice. It is a psychological condition, a neurological artifact of childhood behavioral modification. The episode involves a hurricane destroying Ned's house. The community rallies to rebuild it, but the rebuild is performed by well-meaning amateurs who do not know what they are doing, and the house collapses immediately. This is funny in the way that Springfield's disasters are funny. Ned's reaction is not funny. Ned snaps. He stands in front of the ruined house, in front of the people who built it badly, and the town that assembled to watch, and he says everything he has been holding. He insults his neighbors. He expresses the years of frustration that the relentless positivity had been containing. He says true things about how these people treat each other and how they treat him, things that are accurate and that the town does not want to hear. And then he is institutionalized. He is committed to a psychiatric facility because the community has determined that a man expressing genuine frustration with his circumstances is in need of intervention, while a man who destroys the nuclear facility through incompetence is just Homer being Homer. At the facility, something is revealed. Ned's niceness is not a character trait. It is a therapeutic outcome. Ned was a violent, uncontrollable child. His parents, being of a generation and a philosophy that did not believe in behavioral limits, took him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him. The conditioning was effective. All of the anger, all of the frustration, all of the rage that any person accumulates through the experience of living in a world that treats them poorly was not resolved or processed or healthily expressed. It was suppressed, pushed down, locked behind a behavioral modification so thorough that even decades later, under catastrophic provocation, the rage only briefly surfaces before being pushed back under. Ned's kindness is a cage built around something feral. His patience with Homer is not saintly. It is the programmed response of a man whose nervous system was configured, against his will, to suppress anger at all costs. He cannot express what he actually feels about the way Homer treats him, because the ability to express it was taken away before he was old enough to choose. His forgiveness is not grace. It is compulsion. Everything about Ned's life reads differently with this knowledge. His faith in God is not just spiritual conviction. It is also the only available framework for a man who cannot explain why he keeps suffering despite doing everything right. If God has a plan, then the suffering is not arbitrary. If the suffering is not arbitrary, then there is a reason for it, and that reason absolves Ned of the need to confront the possibility that the universe does not care how hard he tries or how good he is. Faith for Ned is protective in the same way that Springfield's forgetting is protective. It provides an explanation that does not require looking too closely at the actual structure of things. God talks to Homer. This is established in the show. Homer has had face-to-face conversations with God on at least 2 occasions. The drunk who falls asleep in church, the man whose relationship with every religious obligation is at best intermittent and at worst comically dismissive, has been singled out for direct divine communication. The man who has dedicated his life to faith, who attends church every week and prays and attempts to live according to his understanding of what a good person does, has not heard from God directly. The Simpsons is telling you something about the mechanics of reward in Springfield, or about the mechanics of reward in a universe that the show is using Springfield to represent. Goodness is not rewarded. Effort is not recognized. The systems that organize life in this town, whether they are celestial or municipal or economic, do not distribute their attentions according to merit. Homer gets divine conversations and job security and a family that loves him despite everything. Ned gets a dead wife and a hurricane and a brain that will not let him feel what he feels. The gap between them is moral. Ned is better. The gap in outcomes is real. Homer is luckier. And the gap in outcomes has nothing to do with the moral gap, because the universe of Springfield does not organize itself around the moral gap. Now let us move to Hans Moleman. Hans Moleman is, statistically speaking, the most frequently killed character in the history of American animation. He appears in the background of Springfield scenes. He is tiny. He is nearly blind. He wears thick glasses and moves through the town with the fragile, slightly unfocused gait of someone who has been miscalibrated by age and circumstance. He is, visually, the definition of frail. And he dies constantly, not in dream sequences, not in Halloween specials where different rules apply. In regular episodes, in regular Springfield, Hans Moleman is crushed, burned, buried, electrocuted, drowned, eaten, exploded, and run over with a regularity that would make him the most significant victim of circumstance in Springfield's history, if anyone in Springfield kept track. They do not. Moleman dies and appears in the next episode, fine, ready to be killed again. The show never explains this. The show never addresses it. Moleman's perpetual death and perpetual return is simply part of Springfield's background furniture. Under the radiation theory, Moleman represents the most extreme mutation in Springfield, a man whose cellular biology has been so fundamentally altered by exposure that his body reconstitutes after fatal trauma. He does not survive his deaths the way Homer survives injuries. He actually dies. His body ceases to function, and then it starts again. Whatever the plant is doing to the biology of Springfield's long-term residents has done something particular to Moleman that is different in degree, if not in kind, from what it has done to everyone else. The coma theory offers a different reading. Moleman is a background character in Homer's dream. He is the kind of minor figure that a dreaming brain generates to populate a scene and then discards when the scene is over. He dies because the dream is done with him for the moment. He returns because the dream needs him again. He is not a person in this reading. He is a function. A piece of the simulation that gets instantiated and deinstantiated as needed. The collective denial theory has perhaps the most straightforwardly dark reading. A man dies, in public, repeatedly, in front of witnesses. Nobody calls for an investigation. Nobody checks on him. Nobody even mentions, when he walks in looking entirely recovered from the incident that killed him 3 episodes ago, that there is anything remarkable about his presence. Springfield has decided, as it decides with everything else that does not fit the narrative, that Moleman's deaths are simply not a thing that requires attention. Moleman once told someone his age, 31. He said he was 31 years old. He looks like a man in his late 80s. Whatever has happened to him between his birth and the present tense of the show compressed decades of biological aging into a body that has barely been alive for 30 years. Something took a young man and made him look ancient. Something also made him nearly indestructible, which seems paradoxical until you consider that the radiation theory accommodates both outcomes, extreme accelerated aging and extreme biological resilience, as simultaneous effects of the same cause. Both Ned and Moleman occupy the same structural position in Springfield's social ecology. They are the people the town can absorb the maximum amount of suffering without producing any change. Ned forgives everything. Moleman survives everything. Neither of them generates any response from the community that might lead to the community adjusting its behavior to treat them better or to prevent the next disaster. The town would rather Ned stay in his cage and Moleman keep dying than make the kind of changes that would require examining why those things keep happening. Springfield is, in the end, a town that needs its Neds and its Molemans exactly as they are. The caged goodness and the unkillable grief absorb what would otherwise have to be processed and addressed. The cruelties of the system are made bearable because Ned forgives them and Molaman survives them. And as long as both continue to perform those functions, the system does not need to change. Section 12. The floating timeline and the loop we built. Let us slow down now. Let the earlier sections rest. Let the theories and the evidence and the arguments settle somewhere quiet in the mind, like sediment in still water. We are approaching the last section of this story, and it is the one that holds all the others together. This section is about time, specifically about the absence of it. Bart Simpson is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old since the 17th of December, 1989, when The Simpsons first aired. He is 10 years old right now, in whatever year you are watching or listening to this. If you are watching this in 2030, Bart will still be 10. If you come back to this in another decade, Bart will be 10 then too. He does not age, he does not grow, he does not accumulate the particular changes that years deposit on a person. The slightly different face, the new references, the way the clothes fit differently because the body underneath them has been quietly shifting for years. Lisa is 8, Maggie is 1, Homer and Marge are somewhere in their mid-30s, approximately, as they have been for 36 years of calendar time in the real world. The dog has not aged, the house has not changed. The couch is the same couch. The television is the same television. The nuclear plant on the horizon looks exactly as it did when the show began. The industry term for this is the floating timeline. It means the show's present is always the viewer's present. When you watch an episode that aired in 1995, the characters are living in 1995. When you watch one that aired in 2025, they are living in 2025. The cultural references change. The technology changes. The political context changes. The characters do not. They exist in a state of temporal suspension where the world around them evolves, and they remain fixed. Most animated shows do this. The floating timeline is standard practice for long-running animation because the alternative, allowing characters to age in real time, would require an entirely different approach to storytelling, one that would eventually conclude, that would have to end when the characters became adults or elderly or died. The floating timeline is what allows a show to exist indefinitely, to keep producing the same essential story, the same family in the same house, without ever having to confront the implications of time's passage. This is the technical explanation, and it is correct. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has stopped feeling like a convention and started feeling like a symptom. It has been running long enough that the character's failure to age has become genuinely uncanny rather than comfortably familiar. Bart has been 10 years old for longer than many current viewers have been alive. The floating timeline, applied to a show of this duration, stops being invisible and becomes the most visible thing about it. And what the theories in this story have been doing, each in its own way, is explaining the floating timeline, not accepting it as a convention, treating it as evidence, asking what it would mean, within the world of the show, for time to not pass. The radiation theory says the characters do not age because their cellular biology has been altered by decades of contamination. The mutation that produced the yellow skin and the 4 fingers and the protruding eyes also interfered with the normal aging process, locking the biology at whatever state it was in when the contamination reached sufficient saturation. The Simpsons' children are 10 and 8 and 1 forever because the nuclear plant made them that way. Their cells do not divide in the patterns that produce aging. They are suspended in a kind of biological amber. The coma theory says the characters do not age because they exist inside the frozen memory of an unconscious man. Homer went into the coma when his children were those ages, when his wife looked exactly like that, when the house looked exactly like that. His dreaming mind cannot make them older because it does not have the information about what older would look like. The dream can only reproduce what the dreamer knew at the moment of going under. The principle and the pauper theory says time does not pass in Springfield because Springfield collectively votes for it not to pass. The same mechanism that expelled the real Skinner and decreed the imposter to be real is the mechanism that, applied to the passage of time, produces the floating timeline. Springfield is not subject to time. Springfield votes on what is real. Time passing would require acknowledging consequences, and consequences would require addressing causes. So Springfield votes to not acknowledge the passage of time, and the timeline floats. Each theory arrives at the same destination through different routes. Time is broken in Springfield, not as a narrative convention, as a fact within the show's universe. The timeline does not float because the writers decided it should. The timeline floats because something in Springfield, whether it is the radiation or the dream or the social contract or the combination of all three, has disrupted the normal flow of time for everyone who lives there. The show has imagined its characters aging more than once. The most memorable is the season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding, which flashes forward to show Lisa as a young adult, engaged, navigating the specific version of adulthood that the show has always been implying she would navigate, intelligent and principled and lonely, and searching for connection in a world that values other things. The future she is shown is detailed and emotionally specific. It feels real. It feels like the show could live there, in that future with adult Lisa and middle-aged Homer and elderly Marge, and tell stories there. The episode ends. Lisa returns to 8. The future closes like a door. The show can imagine the characters older. It shows you glimpses of who they would become if time were allowed to work. And then it pulls the glimpse back and resumes the suspension. The future is available. It is just not being deployed. This is a choice. Every episode after Lisa's Wedding is the writers choosing, again, to not follow the characters into the future they have already depicted. The choice is made perpetually, renewed every season, ratified every time the opening credits roll. And Bart is still 10 and the bus still passes the nuclear plant. And the family still races for the same couch in the same living room. Why do they keep making that choice? The official answers are practical. Aging the characters would require changing the show in ways the audience might not accept. The floating timeline allows the show to run indefinitely. These are true. But there is something else that the official answers do not quite capture. The Simpsons represent something for its audience that goes beyond entertainment. It has been the American family for so long. It has been the family on the television in so many homes for so many years that it has accumulated a symbolic weight that other shows do not carry. Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie have become cultural furniture. They are part of the shared interior of American life in a way that is genuinely unusual in the history of the medium. Letting them age would mean letting them end. Letting them end would mean admitting that the version of American family life they represent, that particular warm and chaotic and resilient and endlessly renewable domestic energy, was always finite, was always going to conclude, was always going to arrive at a Sunday night when there was no new episode, no reset, no couch gag, just the accumulated weight of everything that had happened across decades of a show, and a family and a town and a culture that organized part of itself around the fact that Homer Simpson would always be coming home to Evergreen Terrace. The audience does not want The Simpsons to age because the audience does not want to age. That is the loop. That is the closed system. That is the reason the floating timeline feels like more than a convention. We built this. The production team makes the show, but the audience maintains the loop by returning. Every season renewal is a vote, like Springfield's vote to keep Tamzarian. We vote, each year, to keep the timeline floating. We vote to keep Bart at 10 and Lisa at 8 and the house intact and the family together on the couch. We vote against the passage of time, against the implications of change, against the specific grief of watching a family you have known for decades finally become too old to tell the stories they have always told. The loop is not Homer's prison. The loop is not Springfield's. The loop belongs to us. We built it with our attention and our loyalty and our willingness to keep returning to the same house on the same street, to watch the same family live through variations of the same life. We pressed pause in 1989 and we have never pressed play. Every theory in this story has been pointing here. The radiation explains the mutations. The coma explains the impossible adventures. The social contract explains the resets. The Burns immortality explains the economy. The predictions explain the cultural mirror. Maggie explains the future. Mona explains the past. The shooting explains the myth. The geography explains the jurisdiction. Each piece is a part of the structure. But the structure is held together by us, by the fact that we keep watching, by the fact that we keep returning to Springfield, to the opening sequence, to the couch, to Homer's familiar exasperation and Marge's familiar patience and Bart's familiar mischief and Lisa's familiar, beautiful, slightly heartbreaking certainty that the world could be better than it is. We return because Springfield is the town that will not change. In a world that will not stop changing, we return because the couch is always there and the family is always on it, and nobody is ever too old to recognize the opening music and feel something warm and familiar move through them. We return because letting go would mean something we are not ready to admit. Time has passed. We have changed. The couch we watched the show on as children is gone, or in a different house, or in someone else's memory. The people we watched it with are older now, or far away, or not here anymore. The world has moved and shifted and produced the decade we are living in, which does not look like the decade the show began in. And Springfield is the same. Bart is 10, the plant is on the horizon. The opening credits roll. We tighten the loop by watching. We maintain the suspension. We keep Springfield frozen because Springfield frozen is Springfield safe. The family on the couch, unchanging, available, always there. The dream that Homer has been dreaming since 1993, or the radiation that has suspended the biology of a contaminated town, or the vote that Springfield takes every week without holding a formal meeting. The result is the same regardless of the mechanism. Springfield does not move, and as long as we are watching, it never will. Conclusion. What Springfield is. 2 hours in Springfield, approximately. More if you have drifted in and out, if you have let the sections wash over you in the particular way that a good long piece of narration can wash over you when you are not quite asleep, but not quite awake either. We have followed the radiation from the cracked cooling towers into the yellow faces of the town. We have examined the morning that Homer did not wake up and the 30 years of dreaming that may or may not have followed. We have reopened the case of a shooting that was officially closed and never quite solved. We have traced the arc of a woman's life from housewife to fugitive, to the mother who kissed her sleeping son and left. We have sat with the oldest man in America, in his building that glows at the edge of town. We have waited with the quietest and possibly most extraordinary person in Springfield, watching her watch everyone else. We have walked the geographic impossibility of a town that borders every state simultaneously. We have watched a community vote to expel the truth and criminalize the memory of it. We have felt the particular sadness of a man whose goodness was conditioned into him against his will, and who keeps meeting a God that talks to everyone except him. Every section, every theory, every piece of evidence, every observation arrives at the same place. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something structural. Something that runs through every strange thing the show has depicted across 36 years of episodes, connecting the floating timeline to the yellow skin, to the forgetful population, to the ancient billionaire, to the silent baby, to the man who may have been dreaming since 1993. Every theory points to a different mechanism. Radiation, dreams, collective denial, engineered immortality, cultural feedback, but they all agree on the destination. Springfield does not operate on the rules that apply everywhere else. The rules in Springfield have been altered. Time does not pass. People do not age. Consequences do not stick. The same catastrophes happen over and over, and the same reset follows, and the same family sits on the same couch in the same house. And nobody asks why. Not the characters, who cannot ask because they have been damaged or dreamed or voted into compliance. And not us, for a long time, because familiarity is a powerful form of blindness. The theories exist because some people looked at Springfield and refused to stop looking. They sat with the yellow skin long enough to ask where it came from. They noticed the tonal shift after the coma episode and traced it forward. They rewatched the shooting episode and found the clues that do not add up. They followed Mona's story across many seasons and found Burns at the end of every thread. They noticed what Maggie was doing in the corner of the frame when everyone was watching someone else. They dug, and they found a Springfield that is stranger and more layered and more quietly devastating than the one the show presents at its surface. A Springfield where Homer's stupidity is a wound left by a system that broke his family before he was old enough to understand it, where Maggie's silence is the single most sophisticated thing anyone in the family has ever done, where Burns's immortality is the inevitable conclusion of unchecked power and unlimited resources, where Marge's patience is the structural member that keeps the whole fragile building upright, where Bart's rebellion is the only sane response available to a person growing up in a place that has decided not to be honest about what it is, where Lisa, 8 years old and brilliant and perpetually hopeful, keeps asking questions that nobody wants to answer because she has never stopped believing that questions matter. That is Springfield. That is the show. 36 seasons of the longest animated series in the history of American television. The most analyzed, most theorized, most dissected program ever made, and still not entirely solved. The largest mystery is the simplest one. Why do we keep going back? Perhaps because they are us. Homer is the father who tries and fails and tries again. Marge is the patience that holds things together when they should fall apart. Bart is who we wanted to be before we learned to be careful. Lisa is who we wanted to become before we learned to manage our expectations. Maggie is the version of ourselves we keep private, the one that watches and understands and waits for the moment when what we know and what we can do will finally align. Or perhaps because letting go would require admitting that the 36 years have passed, that we are older, that the world has changed beyond recognition, that the couch is gone, that some of the people who sat on that couch with us are gone. That time, which does not pass in Springfield, has passed for us relentlessly without asking permission. As long as the show runs, as long as the opening music plays, as long as Bart is 10 and the family makes it to the couch before the credits, we can sit down in Springfield for half an hour and be somewhere time has agreed to stand still. The dreaming town on the floating timeline and the impossible geography between every state and none of them. The yellow lights on the horizon. The faint green glow from the cooling towers. The house on Evergreen Terrace with the light on. Springfield will be there when you come back. It always is. That is the whole point. Rest now. Let the theory settle. Let Springfield recede to wherever it lives in the space between waking and sleep. The mysteries will be there in the morning. The questions will still be unanswered in the way they have been unanswered for 36 years, comfortably, lovingly, by a show that was never going to resolve them because unresolved is what keeps you coming back. Close your eyes. Homer is somewhere on Evergreen Terrace. The lights are on. The family is home. End of script. There is a quality to Burns's intelligence that the show depicts with more consistency than almost any other character trait in its entire run. Burns is not merely rich. He is strategically exceptional. The distinction matters because Springfield has other wealthy people, or at least people who project wealth, and none of them operate the way Burns operates. Burns does not just possess resources. He manages them with the kind of long-horizon thinking that only becomes possible when you have been playing the same game long enough to have watched its patterns repeat. He remembers things, not in the way that Homer cannot remember things, as a comedy running gag. Burns remembers in the specific way that very old people sometimes remember, with a precision that has nothing to do with recent events but everything to do with events from decades ago. He can retrieve the name and context of someone he encountered 60 years ago with the ease that most people retrieve the name of someone they had lunch with yesterday. The long-term memory is intact in a way that suggests his brain, whatever else the weekly treatments have done to it, has maintained its archival function. This creates a peculiar temporal quality in conversations with Burns. He is speaking to you from the present, but he is referencing the past with the casual specificity of someone who was there. He did not read about the Gilded Age in a book. He was in it. He did not study the early 20th century. He lived it. The gap between his frame of reference and the frame of reference of anyone he speaks to in Springfield is not a generation gap. It is 3 or 4 generations. He is not an old man remembering his youth. He is an old man remembering someone else's great-grandparents' youth as though it were his own. This is profoundly disorienting if you allow it to be. Burns has watched America change from something entirely different into the country that currently exists, not as historical study but as lived experience. He was present for industrialization, for the world wars, for the Cold War, for the technological revolution, for everything that shaped the world the show depicts as the present. His perspective on current events is the perspective of someone for whom current events are the latest chapter of a very long book he has been reading since before anyone else in the room was born. And his strategies reflect this. The patience of his scheming is the patience of someone who understands that short-term outcomes are less important than structural positioning. The thing Burns is trying to maintain is not a quarterly profit. It is a century-long dominance. The decisions he makes are optimized not for this year, but for the next 50. He can afford to play the long game because he will be here for the long game. The immortality question, considered from Burns's perspective rather than Springfield's, is a question about what it costs to stay. The weekly treatments are not free. The infrastructure of medical support is not cheap. The pharmaceutical division, the private physicians, the elaborate protocol that Smithers manages, this is an enormous ongoing expenditure of resources dedicated entirely to one purpose: keeping Burns in operation. Burns has decided that the cost is worth it. This is not a calculation that most people ever have the option of making, because most people do not have the resources to make extended survival a project rather than a hope. For Burns, extended survival became a project sometime in the early decades of the last century, and he has been funding that project ever since. Every dollar the plant earns goes into many things, but among them, quietly, continuously, is the maintenance of the man who owns the plant. The project is not eternal. Burns knows this, presumably. Even he has acknowledged, in certain unguarded moments the show provides, that his continuation is not a permanent state, but an ongoing maintenance. The treatments do not stop time, they slow it. The edge they hold back is always there, but it has held for a very long time. And while it holds, Burns runs his empire, employs his population, poisons his town, and keeps the lights on in Springfield. The lights stay on, the deal holds, the system persists. And the oldest man in America looks out from the tallest building at the town that feeds him, with the patient gaze of someone who has learned to think in decades and waits for the next week's treatment. One of the most revealing things the show has done with Maggie is so small and so brief that it is easy to miss on first viewing and easy to forget on subsequent ones. In a handful of episodes across the run, Maggie is shown in situations where she could speak, where there is no plot reason for her to remain silent, where a person with her apparent intelligence, hearing what she hears, could and probably would choose to respond verbally rather than maintaining the performance of infancy. She does not speak. The moments where she almost speaks are more interesting than the moments where she demonstrably could not. The moments of near speech are the moments when you can see the architecture of the choice. She is present. She is clearly processing. She is oriented toward the conversation in the specific way of someone who is following the content, not just the sound. And then the moment passes and the pacifier stays in place. There is an episode in which Maggie is left in the care of people who are less attentive to her than her usual household. In the episode, she navigates a series of challenges that require her to exercise judgment about when to act and when to wait. At each decision point, the show gives you just enough of Maggie's perspective to see that she is calculating. Not reacting, not stumbling through infancy, calculating. She waits when waiting is the right move. She acts when acting is the right move. The timing of her interventions is consistently correct in a way that suggests she is modeling outcomes in advance, rather than responding to events as they unfold. This is not infant behavior. This is not even particularly common adult behavior. The ability to correctly identify the optimal moment for intervention and to restrain yourself from acting before that moment arrives is a skill most adults are still developing in their 40s. Maggie has it at 1 year old. The question this raises is, when did she develop it? The ability to model future states, to project consequences from current conditions, to hold an urge in suspension while waiting for the right moment to act, these do not arrive fully formed. They are developed through observation and practice and a particular kind of emotional regulation that requires understanding that the feelings in the present moment are not the same thing as the best decision for the present moment. Maggie has been observing since she was born. She has been in a household that provides near constant observation material, a father who acts on every impulse and experiences consequences, a mother who regulates her impulses and holds them through the power of patience, a brother who tests systems and sometimes wins and sometimes loses, a sister who speaks her intelligence fully and watches it be deflected. 4 distinct models of how a person can operate in the world, with 4 distinct records of outcomes. Maggie is the youngest. She has been watching all 4 of them for her entire life. The observational advantage of being the youngest is enormous if you pay attention. You get to see everyone else make their moves before you make yours. You get to see which approaches yield which results. You get to refine your strategy before you are required to deploy it. And Maggie is paying attention. There is not a moment in the show where Maggie appears not to be paying attention. Even in scenes where she is nominally background, where she is sitting in the playpen or being carried or just present in the frame without having a specific function, her orientation is alert. She is facing the action. Her eyes are tracking whoever is speaking. She is in the room in the fullest sense, fully present, fully absorbing. She has been absorbing for 36 years. Whatever she has planned, it has been in development for a very long time. The thing that is most remarkable about Maggie, when you consider her fully, is the patience. Every other Simpson is, in their own way, impatient. Homer acts on impulse. Marge's patience has limits that the show regularly approaches and occasionally crosses. Bart's entire personality is organized around the refusal to wait for permission or approval. Lisa fights for things in the present because the future, in Lisa's experience, has a way of not improving things on its own. Even Marge's famous patience is patience in service of a specific goal, the maintenance of the family. It has direction. It is patience towards something. Maggie's patience has no visible direction. She is not waiting for a specific outcome that the show has pointed at. She is waiting in the way that water waits, not for anything in particular, but in readiness for whatever the landscape eventually requires. In a town as strange as Springfield, in a family as complicated as hers, in a world that the various theories suggest is contaminated or dreamed or denied into its current shape, a person who can wait without knowing exactly what they are waiting for is the most dangerous kind. Maggie is very patient. Maggie is always watching. And Maggie has decided that when the time comes, she will know it. The summer of 1995 deserves more description because it was a specific cultural moment that is hard to reconstruct now and easy to underestimate in retrospect. The internet existed in 1995, but it was young and strange, and mostly lived in the computers of universities and tech companies and the households of early adopters. Widespread public engagement with online discussion was not yet the default experience of American media consumption. When people argued about The Simpsons in 1995, they argued in offices and living rooms and school hallways, on the phone, in bars. The argument was horizontal and distributed and slow in the way that arguments were slow before the infrastructure of instantaneous global discussion existed. This meant that the "Who Shot Mr. Burns" mystery operated differently than it would operate today. There was no Twitter thread collecting all the theories. There was no Reddit thread cataloging every clue from every angle. The evidence had to be held in individual memory, written down in notebooks, discussed piece by piece in conversations that happened over time. The theorizing was distributed across millions of individual minds operating without a shared platform. Fox leaned into this. The promotional campaign for the mystery was designed to function in that environment. The environment of water cooler conversation and letters to television magazines and the particular way that American office culture became, for a summer, organized around a fictional shooting. The tie-in special with America's Most Wanted was the most remarkable piece of this. Treating a cartoon crime as a real unsolved case, complete with the visual language of criminal investigation shows, the evidence boards, the witness accounts, the reward offer, the show had figured out something fundamental about how audience investment works. If you make the audience feel like participants rather than spectators, the investment deepens. If you treat the mystery as real, the audience begins, in some corner of their minds, to treat it as real too. The shooting of Mr. Burns was not just a television plot point. It was an event, in the specific sense that events require public engagement to become events rather than mere occurrences. America engaged. The contest entries came in by the thousands. People analyzed the episode frame by frame in the way that was possible in 1995, playing VHS tapes in slow motion, pausing and rewinding. The sundial was studied. The evidence was weighed. The suspects were assessed. The summer passed in the company of this question, and then the answer arrived, and the contest received no clear winner, and the show moved on. The absence of a winner is genuinely significant in a way that discussion of the mystery often overlooks. The show's creators had told the public that the answer was deducible from the clues. The public, in enormous numbers, with genuine attention and effort, had tried to deduce it, and in the entire pool of entries, not one person in the sample reviewed by the production team had arrived at the answer the show had chosen. This is not a failure of audience intelligence. The show's audience is not stupid. The show's audience in 1995 was, if anything, particularly attentive, a pre-internet audience that had developed the habit of close viewing without the assistance of online discussion and shared analysis. These were people who paid attention to television shows in the way that the medium rewarded in that era. The failure to solve the mystery was a failure of the puzzle, not of the solvers. Either the clues were insufficient, which suggests the answer was changed after the clues were set, or the answer was always going to be Maggie, but the clues were not strong enough to force a viewer to that conclusion against more plausible alternatives. What clues should have pointed to Maggie? The gun being found without its owner having fired it, which narrows the shooter to someone who found it on the ground. The DNA evidence, which is Simpson family DNA on Burns's suit. Burns's recognition of the shooter, expressed in the phrase, "Oh, it's you," and the sundial, which Burns himself called an accident. Here is the problem. The DNA is Simpson family DNA, which means it could be Homer. Homer had the clearest motive of anyone in Springfield. He had the gun proximity. He had the opportunity. And in a show that had spent years establishing Homer as the figure whose relationship with Burns was the most fraught, the most degrading, the most heavily laden with accumulated grievance, Homer shooting Burns is narratively coherent in a way that Maggie shooting Burns is not. Maggie shooting Burns is not incoherent. It is possible within the logic the show establishes, but it is the reading that requires the most interpretive charity, the most willingness to extend the evidence past what it clearly supports. And audiences, doing exactly what the show asked them to do, which was to reason from the evidence, could not be expected to extend that charity unless the clues forced them to it. The clues did not force them to it. The clues pointed most strongly at Homer. The show chose Maggie anyway, and then said the answer was always findable. The contest was essentially unfindable. And the show knew this, somewhere, because the one person who posted the correct answer before the reveal was acknowledged on the DVD commentary with a specific kind of reverence that you reserve for someone who got to a true thing through a path you cannot fully reconstruct. Not the satisfaction of a puzzle solver who found the intended path. Something else. Something closer to the respect you have for someone who reached the right conclusion, for reasons that remained private. Who was that person? What clues did they follow? What argument did they make in that newsgroup post? The account is gone. The post is presumably gone. The single documented instance of someone correctly predicting the Maggie answer before it was revealed exists in the record as a reference to a thing that cannot be retrieved. The mystery within the mystery. The episode Mother Simpson is often cited as a candidate for the best episode the show has ever produced. Different fans will give different answers to that question, and the answers reveal something about what each person thinks the show is fundamentally about. People who think the show is fundamentally a satire tend to cite episodes where the satire is sharpest. People who think the show is fundamentally a comedy tend to cite the funniest episodes, the ones that hit the highest density of good jokes per minute. People who think the show is fundamentally about family tend to cite Mother Simpson. The episode does something that the show's comedy format creates enormous resistance against. It spends its final sequence sitting in grief without flinching away from it. The final minutes of the episode, after Mona has had to leave and Homer cannot stop her and the FBI is there and there is nothing to be done, is Homer Simpson sitting alone on the hood of his car, watching a sky full of stars. And the music plays and the credits run and nobody says anything funny because there is nothing funny to say. Homer lost his mother twice in one episode. He found her, and then the infrastructure of a 30-year-old injustice pulled her away before the reunion was deep enough to do what reunions are supposed to do. There was not enough time. There is never enough time in these situations. You find each other and the finding takes too long and something is already arriving to separate you again. The show let that breathe. It did not cut away. It did not have Homer fall down or say something stupid or stumble into a joke that would release the tension. It let Homer sit with it. It let him be a man who has lost something important, in silence, under stars that do not care about his loss but are there anyway, vast and indifferent and somehow comforting in their indifference, because they have been there longer than the pain and will be there after the pain ends. This is the emotional register that the show is capable of reaching when it chooses to reach for it. And it chose, specifically, to reach for it in an episode about Homer's mother. Not about Bart's pranks or Burns's schemes or Springfield's latest crisis. About a mother and a son and the decades between them and the particular cruelty of finding something you thought was gone and then having it taken away again before the finding has had time to become something lasting. Mona's story is also a story about the specific cost of choosing conscience when conscience has powerful enemies. She destroyed Burns's weapons laboratory because she believed it should not exist. This was the correct belief. Biological weapons designed to kill people should not be manufactured in residential neighborhoods. The correctness of the belief did not protect her from the consequences of acting on it. Correct beliefs held by people with limited power and opposed by people with unlimited power do not protect their holders. They just mean that the thing that happens to you for holding them is unjust. Burns destroyed her family because she destroyed his laboratory. The destruction of the laboratory was justified. The destruction of her family was not. Both things happened. The justified act and the unjust consequence coexisted in the same sequence of events, as they do in the real world, with a consistency that makes the world of The Simpsons feel, in this episode at least, less like satire and more like documentation. Springfield is not a critique of America from the outside. It is America from the inside, the view of the people who built it and live in it and know exactly where the bodies are buried, metaphorically and in Burns's case possibly literally. Mona's story is the story of what happens to people who try to hold the powerful accountable in a system where the powerful have more resources than the consequences can reach. She was right. She lost. Those two things are not in contradiction. That is the lesson the show is teaching in the quiet minutes of the final sequence, while Homer sits on the car hood watching the stars. The Cypress Hill example is worth dwelling on because it is one of the cleaner cases in the prediction canon, and it illustrates something interesting about how the predictions work at the level of the joke itself. The joke in the 1996 episode is not about Cypress Hill performing with a symphony orchestra. The joke is about the absurdity of the collision, the specific comedy that comes from placing two things together that belong to completely different cultural registers. A hip-hop group associated with a particular counterculture and a symphony orchestra associated with the opposite cultural register. The collision is funny because of the distance between the two things. When the event actually happened in 2024, 28 years after the joke, the comedy of the collision had been absorbed by the culture to the point where it was no longer a collision. Hip-hop and orchestral music had been in conversation for decades by then. The aesthetic distance that made the joke funny in 1996 had been substantially reduced by the actual trajectory of both genres and their relationship to each other. The event happened, but it happened in a world that was different from the world the joke assumed. What does this mean for the prediction? The show predicted the event, technically. The specific combination of Cypress Hill and a symphony orchestra did happen. But the show did not predict the cultural context in which it happened, and the cultural context is the thing that determines whether the event means what the show implied it would mean. In 1996, the joke pointed at something impossible. In 2024, the performance pointed at something that had become, gradually, possible enough to occur without causing the kind of cultural friction the joke anticipated. The prediction was accurate at the level of the event and inaccurate at the level of the meaning. The show said this combination would be absurd. The world said, actually, by 2024, it is not that absurd. The show was right about the what and wrong about the why. This is a pattern that runs through many of the predictions. The Trump prediction was right about the what and debatable about the why. The show depicted a Trump presidency as an absurdist conclusion, the logical endpoint of celebrity culture consuming political culture as a joke. When it happened, the question of whether it was absurdist or simply the product of real political dynamics that the show had not fully anticipated is one that has been generating argument ever since. The what occurred. The why it occurred is still being litigated. The predictions are not prophetic in the sense that they reveal hidden knowledge about specific future events. They are prophetic in the sense that they identify real dynamics, real trajectories, real structures in American culture, and follow them forward to plausible outcomes. Some of those outcomes occur, some do not. The ones that occur get screenshot and shared. The ones that do not occur are already forgotten. The show's real predictive achievement is not any individual episode's correspondence to any individual future event. The show's real predictive achievement is that it has been running long enough and has been observant enough that some of what it has said about American culture is inevitably going to correspond to what American culture eventually produces. 800 episodes. Thousands of observations. Some of them are going to be right. And the ones that are right are going to feel like prophecy because they will arrive in a future that has been shaped in small ways by the fact that the prediction existed and circulated and became part of how the culture imagined its own possibilities. The show does not predict the future. The show participates in creating it. The real Seymour Skinner deserves more thought than he usually receives in discussions of the episode, because he is, in structural terms, the most important character in the episode, even though he is the one who disappears from it. He is a man who has a specific, documented, legally verified identity. He is a veteran who survived capture and imprisonment in a war. He went through something genuinely terrible and survived it. He came home. He had every reasonable expectation that coming home meant coming home, that the life he had left would be there to return to, changed perhaps by the years, but fundamentally still his to inhabit. He found his life occupied by someone else. The occupation was not malicious in its origins. Tamzarian did not set out to steal Skinner's life. He fell into it sideways, through grief and a mistake and the particular human neediness that makes a person accept the identity being offered to them when they have none of their own. The occupation was accidental. Its duration was not. 20 years is not accidental. 20 years is a choice, renewed continuously, to maintain a fiction at the expense of the truth. The real Skinner arrives and presents himself. He has proof. He has documents. He is standing there, real and verified, offering the town the chance to correct a 20-year error. He is asking for his life back. He is not asking for revenge or restitution or punishment for Tamzarian. He is asking for the simple restoration of truth. I am Seymour Skinner. The man you have been calling Seymour Skinner is not. Please acknowledge the difference. The town declines. They decline not because they do not believe him, but because they do. If they did not believe him, the vote would not be necessary. The vote is necessary precisely because the truth is evident, and the community must formally choose to override it. The real Skinner is removed not because anyone disputes his identity, but because his identity is inconvenient. He is then physically expelled from Springfield, and the law is changed to make it criminal to acknowledge that the expulsion happened. The last honest man in Springfield is put on a train. What happens to him after that is something the show never addresses, because addressing it would require the show to acknowledge the degree of cruelty contained in that image. A man who survived a prisoner of war camp, who returned to reclaim the life that was owed to him, who presented himself honestly to his community and asked for truth, is tied to a railroad car and removed. He is alive, somewhere, presumably. The show does not say where he goes or what he does after the train carries him away. He simply ceases to exist within the show's frame, which is itself a kind of metaphor. The community that expelled him has also expelled the narrative attention that would follow him. He is outside the frame, which in Springfield is the same as being outside the world. This is what happens to the real thing in a town that has voted for the real thing's replacement. You do not just lose your place, you lose your existence within the community's story. You become the thing that happened before the agreed-upon version, the draft that was discarded in favor of the published edition. The published edition sits in Skinner's office right now, signing his name to documents that do not belong to him, in a town that has made the signing legal. There is a particular cruelty in the God talks to Homer dynamic that becomes more pointed the longer you sit with it. God talks to Homer in the 4th season, before the coma. God talks to Homer in circumstances that are not earned in any theological sense, not produced by prayer or by moral effort or by the specific attention to spiritual development that Ned has given his entire adult life. God talks to Homer because Homer is Homer, and in Springfield, Homer is the gravitational center of the universe. Everything happens to Homer. Ned prays. Ned attends church. Ned follows the rules of his faith with the scrupulousness of someone who has decided that the rules matter not as a performance for other people, but as a genuine commitment to a way of living. He tithes. He volunteers. He loves his neighbor, literally, in the sense of the commandment, even when his neighbor is Homer, and loving Homer requires substantial effort that is rarely reciprocated. And God does not speak to Ned. The show has not depicted a face-to-face conversation between Ned and God. If such a conversation happened, it has not been shown. The man who has dedicated his life to the relationship is not shown having the relationship. The man who stumbles into church hungover and falls asleep during the sermon has extended conversations with the deity on at least 2 occasions. This is either a profound statement about the arbitrary nature of grace in a universe that does not distribute its attention according to merit, or it is the show making a joke about the unfairness of reward and punishment in Springfield, or it is both of those things at the same time, which is the mode the show operates in most reliably. The surface is the joke. Underneath the joke is the statement. They coexist. The statement, stripped of the joke, is Springfield does not reward righteousness. Springfield is not organized around merit. The systems that determine what happens to people in Springfield are not systems that recognize the quality of a person's behavior as a relevant input. Homer and Ned live next door to each other. Homer does less and receives more. Ned does more and receives less. The gap between them in terms of outcome is as large as the gap between them in terms of effort and character, but the gap runs in the wrong direction. The person who tries harder has less to show for it. This is dark. It is dark in the specific way that a comedy about American life can be dark, when you pull back far enough from the jokes to see the structure they are hanging on. The structure is the argument that effort and decency and the particular goodness that Ned represents are not protected by the universe. They are not insulated from loss. They do not produce outcomes proportional to the inputs. Ned is the most thorough refutation of the idea that goodness is its own reward. He is good. His reward is a dead wife, a destroyed house, a neighbor who will not change, and a God who speaks to other people. The goodness is real. The reward is absent. That is not a comfortable thing to sit with. The show puts it in front of you wrapped in the comedy of Ned's specific verbal tics and his neighborly persistence, and the comedy makes it bearable. But the thing underneath the comedy does not change. It is there whether or not you are laughing at it. Hans Moleman's 31 years deserve a final word. If he is telling the truth, and within the logic of the show there is no evidence that he is not, then something happened to him in the span of a human lifetime that aged him past all recognition. He was born and at some point was 31. At 31, he looked like he looks now. Everything that should have been ahead of him, the decades that most people have between 31 and whatever they eventually become, had been consumed, not lived. Consumed. The difference is important. Living decades is the normal experience. Consuming them, burning through them, having them taken rather than spent, is something else. Something that leaves a mark not just on the outside, but on the structural relationship between the body and time. Moleman is old in the way of something that was forced to become old too fast, and then he keeps dying and coming back, which is the body refusing to complete what time accelerated. His biology was disrupted in one direction by whatever produced his appearance and is being disrupted in another direction by whatever prevents his deaths from sticking. Springfield made him. Springfield keeps him. He is the town's most accurate mirror of what it does to the people inside it. The most emotionally resonant aspect of the floating timeline is the one that the show itself addressed directly in one quiet moment that television criticism has not fully processed. In the season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding, Lisa is shown at age 23. The episode is structured as a flash-forward visited through the frame of a fortune teller at a Renaissance fair, and the flash-forward is detailed in the specific way of the show's best writing, not just visually different from the present, but emotionally evolved, carrying forward the threads of who Lisa is at 8 and following them into who she would be at 23 in a way that feels inevitable rather than arbitrary. Lisa at 23 is brilliant, as expected. She is studying at a British university, as might have been expected given her particular intellectual trajectory. She is engaged to a man named Hugh, and the engagement falls apart not because either person is bad, but because Hugh cannot accept her family, and Lisa will not abandon her family, and the incompatibility between those two positions is the incompatibility between who Lisa is and who Hugh needs her to be. The show knew this. The writers who constructed that episode knew that Lisa's most durable characteristic is her loyalty to people who do not always deserve it, who do not always meet her where she needs to be met, who cannot always match what she is willing to give. Her family is difficult and exhausting and imperfect in ways that affect her every single week, and she loves them completely, and the love does not condition itself on their improving. It is given. It has been given since she was born. It will continue to be given. Hugh could not accept this, and Lisa would not trade it. That is a complete portrait of a character. That is the show following its own internal logic about who Lisa Simpson is, all the way to a conclusion that is both surprising and inevitable. The surprise is that the flash forward produced something this specific and this true. The inevitability is that Lisa's character, understood fully, could not have produced any other outcome. The episode ends. Lisa returns to being 8. The show could have made a different choice at this moment. It could have found a mechanism for aging the characters. It could have decided that the flash-forward episode was the beginning of a new direction, that from this episode forward the characters would move toward the futures the show had imagined for them. It could have changed. It did not change. It returned. Bart went back to 10. Lisa went back to 8. The couch was there and the television was there, and Homer was falling into the living room from whatever implausible direction the couch gag that week required. The show looked at who its characters would become, fully and carefully, and then put them back where they were. This is not a failure of imagination. The flash forward proves the imagination is there. This is a choice. The show chose to keep its characters young, and it has renewed that choice every season since. And the choice is made in full knowledge of who these characters would be if they were allowed to grow. Every season after Lisa's wedding is a season in which the show knows exactly who Lisa would become and has chosen, for reasons that are partly commercial and partly something more complex, not to let her become it yet. Every episode since then is the show holding 8-year-old Lisa in place, while knowing that 23-year-old Lisa is possible, is imagined, is in some sense more fully realized than the 8-year-old, and choosing the 8-year-old anyway. The loop is not ignorance. The loop is a choice made with full information. We are the same. We know the characters would age if the show let them. We know what the show would eventually look like if time passed. We return anyway, week after week, to the version that does not change, to the 8-year-old and the 10-year-old and the 1-year-old and the mid-30s, parents in the house, on the street, in the town that is nowhere and everywhere. We choose the loop too. We choose it because the alternative is letting them go, and letting them go means acknowledging everything that has changed since the first time we sat down with them. The couch we sat on, the room we were in, the version of ourselves that watched the opening credits for the first time and did not know yet what we were beginning to love. Springfield is a time machine that runs in one direction, not forward, backward, endlessly, to the moment before the characters aged, to the permanent present of the floating timeline, to the house on Evergreen Terrace as it has always been and will always be, as long as we keep pressing play. There are worse places to spend a long night. There are worse things to carry into sleep. Close your eyes now. Let Springfield settle. The lights are on in the yellow house at the end of the street. Someone is home. There is a specific quality to the sound of the Simpsons theme music that is worth naming, because it is the first thing that happens every time and it is doing something before the first image appears. Danny Elfman wrote the theme in 1989. It is a piece of music that has been played, in full or in part, more times than almost any other composition in the history of American television. Hundreds of millions of people have heard it. Most of them have heard it so many times that they stopped hearing it in any active sense decades ago. It lives below conscious attention, in the part of the brain that processes the familiar without requiring the full resources of awareness. But the first time you heard it, and the first time you heard it, something was being established. The theme tells you, before you have any other information about the show, several things at once. It tells you this is going to be fast. It is going to be energetic. It is going to be playful, slightly manic, organized around a particular kind of kinetic energy that is friendly rather than threatening. The tempo is the tempo of comedy, quick enough to stay ahead of the pause that drama requires for weight. The melody is bright. It moves. It does not linger. And underneath the brightness, there is something else. Elfman's theme has a quality that his best work often has: a slight strangeness at the edges, a chord that is almost resolved but not quite, a passage that is playful and also slightly urgent. The brightness is real. The strangeness is also real. Both exist in the same theme, simultaneously, without canceling each other out. This is, it turns out, a perfect introduction to what the show is. The brightness is the comedy, the gags, the satire, the 36 years of laughter. The strangeness at the edges is everything we have been discussing tonight. The contamination, the coma, the shooting, the exile of truth, the immortal billionaire, the silent genius in the playpen, the floating timeline, the missing geography. The theme tells you both things at once. Most people hear only the brightness because the brightness is what the show presents first and most consistently. The strangeness requires time to find, and time with the show, and the particular attention that lets you sit with a familiar thing long enough that the familiar surface begins to become transparent and you can see what is underneath it. Springfield is a bright and strange place. The theories in this story are attempts to account for the strangeness. They do not eliminate the brightness. Nothing in this story should make the show less funny, less warm, less the thing that it has been for the people who love it. The theories sit alongside the show, not in place of it. They are the view from underneath, through the glass, looking up at the familiar yellow faces from below the surface of the water. The faces are still there. The family is still on the couch. The theme is still playing. Homer is still coming home. What this story has tried to do, across all of its sections and all of its theories, is give the familiarity back its strangeness. Not to make Springfield uncomfortable, but to make it visible again. To find the edges of it that have gone soft with years of exposure and sharpen them enough to see clearly for a moment. The yellow skin, the floating timeline, the three-eyed fish, the cracked cooling towers patched with gum. These things are funny. They are also evidence. They point towards something. The show built a coherent, cumulative argument about power and contamination and denial and the particular ways that communities organize themselves around the necessity of not knowing what they cannot afford to know. The show built this argument across 36 years of jokes. That is remarkable. That is something no other piece of television has done, not at that scale, not across that span, not with that combination of comedy and accumulated darkness and genuine feeling. The Simpsons is a comedy about a family. The Simpsons is a diagnosis of a culture. The Simpsons is possibly a man's dream of everyone he loves, generated by a brain that is fighting to hold on to the people it cannot reach. The Simpsons is the town that time forgot and the loop that we maintain and the mirror that we have been staring into for so long that it is possible we have started to look like what we see. The show will not confirm any of this. It will not deny it either. At least not in any way that settles the question, because settled questions do not require you to keep watching. Keep watching. There is always more in Springfield than the surface holds. There is always something else in the corner of the frame, if you look at the corner long enough. Rest now, the theories will keep, the mysteries will keep, Springfield will keep, it always does. That is the whole point of a loop. There is one more aspect of Springfield's relationship to memory that deserves its own space, separate from the principle and the Popper discussion, because it operates at a scale that is harder to see than a single episode's plot. The show resets between episodes. We have established this. The dome is forgotten, the catastrophe is absorbed, the family is back on the couch next Sunday. But there is a subtler form of forgetting in the show that operates within episodes and that the coma theory and the radiation theory both speak to in different ways. Characters in Springfield regularly fail to carry forward the emotional weight of what has happened to them. Homer learns something important about himself, or about his father, or about the cost of his behavior, and then the learning does not accumulate. The lesson lands in the episode where it happens and then is gone, not dramatically erased, just not there the following week. Homer is, in each episode, roughly the same person he was in every previous episode, regardless of what he has been through. This is standard episodic television. The format requires it. Characters must be reset to their functional baseline so that the next episode can start fresh, so that the comedy machine can generate its next product without having to account for the accumulated character development of hundreds of previous episodes. But within the logic of Springfield, characters who cannot accumulate learning, who cannot carry the emotional and psychological weight of what they have experienced from week to week, are characters whose brains are not functioning the way functional brains function. Memory consolidation, the process by which experience becomes permanent learning, is a biological process. It can be disrupted. It is disrupted by sleep deprivation. It is disrupted by certain medical conditions. It is disrupted by neurological damage of various kinds. It is disrupted, in ways that are now well documented, by exposure to certain environmental toxins. The toxin that best explains widespread, population-level failure of memory consolidation in a single geographic location would need to be something present in the air or water supply of that location. Something that every person in the area was continuously exposed to. Something that operated at low enough levels that the acute effects were not obvious, but the chronic effects were cumulative. Something like the long-term exposure to the radioactive runoff of a nuclear facility with 342 safety violations. Springfield's collective forgetting is not lazy writing. It is not the audience failing to notice continuity errors. It is, within the logic the show has constructed across its entire run, the predicted behavior of a population whose memory consolidation capacity has been chronically compromised by their environment. They cannot remember the dome because the part of their brain that would convert the dome into permanent memory has been degraded by decades of living in the town that built the dome's prison. Homer cannot carry his lessons forward because the facility where he works has been slowly damaging his neurological function since the first day he punched in his time card. The town forgets. The characters forget. The radiation is in the water. The water is in the people. The people are in Springfield. Springfield is still there, somewhere on the map that does not show it, with its cracked towers and its yellow sky and its missing memories, going about its weekly business. In the end, the show might be the most sophisticated piece of writing about denial ever produced in American popular culture. It spent 36 years telling a story about a community that cannot remember what it needs to remember to protect itself, wrapped in enough comedy that the audience forgot too. We watched. We laughed. We forgot to ask about the fish. Lisa Simpson is, in some ways, the most important character the show has ever built. Not the most beloved, not the most quoted, not the one whose face appears most often on merchandise or whose voice has become most iconic, but the most important in the specific sense that she is the one the show uses as its moral compass in moments when it wants to know where north is. Homer is the show's heart, its warm, chaotic center, the gravitational pull that everything else orbits. Bart is its id, its pleasure principle, its refusal to be what the adults require. Marge is its conscience in the domestic sense, the management of family life as it actually exists rather than as it should. Maggie is its future, unrevealed and patient. Lisa is its intelligence. Not her intelligence specifically, though that too. The show's intelligence. When The Simpsons wants to say something true about something difficult, it usually finds its way to Lisa. It is Lisa who points at the three-eyed fish and asks what it means. It is Lisa who follows the implications of Springfield's environmental record to their uncomfortable conclusion. It is Lisa who fights for the things Springfield would prefer not to fight for, who insists on the questions Springfield would prefer not to ask, who keeps pressing on the wound of the town's silence because silence, in Lisa's understanding, is never the same as peace. She is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years, and she has spent all 36 of those years being the person in Springfield who most consistently refuses to accept the comfortable version of events in place of the true one. In a town that has voted to criminalize truth, that has expelled its most honest residents, that has absorbed every catastrophe into forgetfulness, Lisa keeps asking. She has not stopped asking. The town has not answered. The town does not intend to answer. But she keeps asking anyway, because some people are built that way, because the refusal to stop asking in the face of systematic non-response is a form of heroism, even when it looks, from the outside, like stubbornness. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for longer than many of her current viewers have been alive. She is still asking. That may be the most hopeful thing about Springfield. Sleep well. The questions will keep until morning. Springfield will be there when you return. Homer is on the couch. The lights are on. Good night.